Go away, you useless wife who can't even do chores. I sat on the floor, feeling small and insulted, while my mother-in-law stared at me angrily. We don't need you. You always look sad. You're just a burden. My sister-in-law, who never helps at home, said mean things. Wait a second, Mauris. Your mom and sister are being too mean. I tried to say, but before I could finish, even my husband Mauricio looked disappointed in me. My mom and sister are right. I don't need a wife who can't do chores and work. I have a young girl who helps part-time and is much better. Pack your things and leave, Mauricio said firmly. All three of them kept saying hurtful things, calling me a bad wife. I clenched my fists, feeling angry. After using me all this time, how could they be so mean? Just you wait. I'll make sure you all get what's coming to you. But I looked at the three of them and said without changing my expression, fine, I'll leave. The family that's been putting everything on me will see what happens next. My name's Eleanor. I'm 32 and a working wife. Nowadays, many women work after getting married, and I've kept working at the same company I joined after finishing college because I enjoy it. One morning, while I was getting ready for work, Mauricio asked me, "Hey Eleanor, can you handle this? Tax season is coming," and he handed me a bunch of receipts and invoices. Again, "You should handle the shop's accounting." Mauricio avoided eye contact. "You know I'm better at it, so please." I married Mauricio 5 years ago. He used to work at a restaurant where I'd sometimes go. After a few dates, we decided to get married. Now, Mauricio has his own cafe, but he leaves all the boring tasks like buying things and accounting to me. As I headed out the door, my mother-in-law said, "Eleanor, I want Chinese food tonight. Can you get the ingredients?" "No, you can do it when you get back. Also, Vivian and the kids are coming this weekend. Make sure you cook something they'll like," I reluctantly replied before leaving the house. When we got married, I wanted to live just with Mauricio, but he said we should live with his mom because he was worried about her being alone. So we moved to his big family house. My mother-in-law isn't good at cleaning, and the place was a mess when we moved in. She gets money from her pension but spends most of it eating out because she doesn't like cooking. Mauricio always says that housework is a woman's job, so even though I work too, I have to do all the chores for everyone in the family. On top of that, my sister-in-law, Vivian, who moved out after getting married, often comes back home with her kids. When she's here, I have even more work to do. This morning, when I heard she's coming back this weekend, I thought, oh no, not again. And then the dreaded weekend comes. I'd love to relax on my days off from work, but instead I have to take care of Vivian's kids and cook while rushing around. Vivian drops a big news on me. "Eleanor, by the way, I'm getting divorced and moving back here with the kids next month. Just so you know." "What? Are you serious? Got a problem with that?" No, that must be hard for you. When are you moving back?" "As soon as I can." My sister-in-law is coming home with her kids. At first, I'm surprised, but then I think it might be good because Vivian used to be a housewife, so she might help with the chores. That would make my life easier. Even though we're not very close, I hope for less work and go on with my days. But I quickly realized I was wrong. Vivian, just like her mom, doesn't do anything. She spends all day watching TV and eating snacks. She doesn't work or help around the house. Her laziness with chores was one of the reasons for her divorce. Now I have to do all the chores, even making meals for her fussy kids and getting them ready for school. As time goes on, my job gets busier with a new project needing more hours and early mornings. The house gets messier and messier. Coming home to a messy house is really disappointing, but everyone keeps asking, "When's dinner?" Or saying, "You're so slow." To make things worse, Vivian and my mother-in-law start making rude comments. "Eleanor, the laundry is piling up. Just because you work doesn't mean you can be lazy. But I'm busy too." When I try to explain, Vivian interrupts, talking back to your mother-in-law. "You're so brave, Eleanor, and you've been buying all the meals. That's not good for the kids. If you're home, can't you help a little?" What are you saying? Mauricio owns a business. You don't have to work. You're just selfish. So be a perfect wife. I couldn't believe it, and they acted like it was normal. That night, I was so mad I could burst. So I talked to Mauricio. "I'm busy with work, and neither your mom nor your sister is helping with the chores. Are you saying bad things about my mom and sister Eleanor?" Mauricio looked at me angrily. I said surprised, "No, that's not it. But I can't do all the chores alone." Could you help me a bit? I'm busy with my business. You might not get it because you have an easy job in an office, but running a business is tough. And isn't housework a wife's job? Don't expect me to help. Are you serious? Mauricio just goes to sleep, leaving me upset. But then I get an idea. I think of something good. I quickly grab my phone and order some things online before going to bed. A few days later, a bunch of new gadgets arrive. A machine that washes and dries clothes, a robot that cleans, and kitchen tools that cook by themselves. If no one's going to help me, I'll use these gadgets to make my chores easier. While the delivery guys bring in the new washer, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law arrive. You bought a new washer without asking. The old one still works. But it's old, and this will make laundry faster and easier, I argue. What's all this? A cleaning robot and cooking gadgets. Eleanor, come here. They call me to the living room, where they're sitting on the sofa, and I'm told to sit on the floor. Mauricio is there too, sitting with his mom, looking pleased. What's happening? I ask. My mother-in-law yells. What do you mean? What's happening? You spent all this money on lazy gadgets with the household money. What were you thinking? I thought it would help with chores. It's not about helping. People these days rely too much on machines, my sister-in-law adds. Exactly, Eleanor. And those are fancy items. The ones we have still work. You're just wasting money because Mauricio owns a business. She stares at me, and Mauricio agrees. But you're just making things easier for yourself. Can't you even do chores properly? I wanted to reply, look who's talking, but I stayed quiet. Finally, my mother-in-law, maybe tired of my quietness, snaps. If you can't do chores properly, you should leave. I stare at her in surprise. She stares back at me. We don't need you. Mauricio and I can manage without you. You always seem tired and unhappy. You're just a burden. My sister-in-law says like she's had enough. Hold on, Mauricio. Your mom and sister are being too mean. When I look to Mauricio for support, he looks down at me and says, they're right. I don't need a wife who can't handle chores. I look at Mauricio in shock, but he just smirks. I'm a business owner and I can spend my money however I want. I don't need a wife who spends it to make her life easier. Why would you say that? And I've been getting along with a young part-time helper. She's pretty, unlike you. Pack your things and go. Shocked by Mauricio's words, all three start criticizing me, saying I'm a bad wife. I clench my fists in anger. After using me for so long, they say this to me. Just you wait. I'll make you sorry, but I stayed calm and said, okay, I'll go. Good will be better without you, my mother-in-law said meanly, and I quietly stood up and put something on the table. Mauricio, let's get divorced. It was a form for divorce that I had prepared earlier. Tired of everything. Okay, I'll sign it. But don't regret it later. Mauricio signed the papers, and I packed my bags and moved to a temporary apartment the same day. No one said goodbye to me. I handed in the divorce papers at City Hall and rented a new place. At the same time, I accepted a promotion at work that I had been turning down because of housework, and I became a department head. I was able to move forward in my career, which I had almost given up on, and I focused more and more on my job. Happy that nobody was there to hold me back, I felt relieved about a week after leaving. My ex-mother-in-law started calling, but I was busy and didn't want to talk to someone who had called me worthless. I kept ignoring her calls. A year later, on a day when I wasn't working, she called again. Thinking it was time to sort things out, I answered, hello? Ah, Eleanor, you finally picked up. Why did you ignore me for over a year? What do you want? Well, how are you? Are you okay? I replied honestly, I'm doing great. Working hard in my own place. I got a better job and more money. I'm living well. Really? Would you think about coming back? She sounded almost desperate, and I asked, surprised, why now? We're having problems. We're running out of money. I couldn't help but smile as I said, oh? Mauricio's cafe isn't even making $11,000 in profit. Huh. And neither you nor your daughter are working. So that makes sense. Eleanor, you knew? Yes, I knew. Mauricio's cafe was only making about $800 a month in profit. I handled the money, so of course I knew. Mauricio's cafe was only making about $800 a month in profit. I handled the money, so of course I knew. Mauricio acted like a big business owner but didn't manage things properly or take care of customers. So he probably didn't know. Of course I knew. I was the one doing all the money stuff and keeping track of what we had. What? Why didn't you tell us? I didn't know you were a big manager at a company and giving so much money for us to live. Yeah, I was giving over $3,000 every month. That's how we all managed. I was adding my money to help because I knew Mauricio's shop wasn't making much. Maybe Mauricio realized he couldn't handle things without my money after I left. Please, Eleanor, come back. Oh, by the way, what happened to Mauricio's shop? Ignoring my ex-mother-in-law's request, I asked, is Mauricio's shop closing next month? Even the part-time helper left him. It's not surprising with such bad management, he can't run a business. And he's too proud to do what he needs to do. No woman would want to be with a man like that. I laughed, and my ex-mother-in-law didn't know what to say. Can we finish? I'm busy, she quickly said. Also, the house has been a mess since you left. She said the house was a mess because no one was cleaning. The house was messy. Nobody was cooking, so they had to buy meals, and they couldn't even buy a new washing machine. It would have been nice if you left those machines, ex-mother-in-law says. What are you saying? Those lazy machines? And why can't I take what I paid for? I shouldn't have said that, but I never thought the house would get like this just because nobody was doing chores, I said, getting a bit annoyed. Isn't it strange that 3 grown-ups can't handle chores? What are your daughter and Mauricio doing? She whispered. Well, Mauricio is sitting at home all day, doing nothing since he found out his shop isn't making money. He said he could spend his money however he wanted because he's a business owner. And Vivian won't work, no matter what I say. She doesn't do chores. And she even asks me for money for herself and her kids. My pension is running out. Really? Your daughter told me she didn't need me because she had you, I said coldly. My ex-mother-in-law tried to be nice again. Please, Eleanor, my pension isn't enough for us anymore. I don't want to go back to that house. Your children are quite the freeloaders, aren't they? She didn't know what to say. As I was about to end the call, she kept talking. Eleanor, will change. Please come back. Let's all be happy together again. Sure, be happy with a useless wife, I interrupted, and she struggled with her words but kept begging. I'm sorry for what I said. We're family. Help us. We can't even pay the taxes for the house. We'll have to sell it. I don't have to help you, and I don't want to. Figure it out yourselves. Goodbye from your useless wife. I hung up and blocked her number, ignoring her cries. Sipping my coffee in my tidy apartment, I chuckled. 3 months later, I happened to walk past Mauricio's cafe. It was closed. Even their house was sold. According to a neighbor I met, they sold the house and moved to a small apartment nearby. They caused trouble in the neighborhood, always fighting and making a mess. People complained a lot. They could have worked hard and taken care of their home. But they didn't, which wasn't surprising. I looked at their old house and walked away. Since then, I've focused on my work. Recently, a nice colleague told me he liked me, saying, I love how you work so hard. Let's date and maybe get married. I think my next marriage isn't far off, and this time, I'm excited to find happiness.
Building your own home is a big achievement in life. Let me tell you about how my marriage started to fall apart just after we reached this peak of happiness. My name is Abigail, and I'm 30 years old. My family includes my husband Gary, who is 35, and our 3-year-old daughter Sarah. We decided to build our dream home. You might think everything was smooth sailing and filled with happiness. That's what most people would assume. But for me, it's quite the opposite. Lately, with our new house being built and problems with my in-laws, I've been endlessly worried. The first sign of trouble in our relationship came when we left Sarah at my in-laws' place. Both my husband and I work, so we rarely have any free time. On weekdays, we spend our weekends searching for the right materials and discussing the design of our house. When we took Sarah with us, she would often get bored and restless, so we usually left her with my parents who live close by. But one morning my father fell and had to see the doctor, so he couldn't watch Sarah. I thought we should cancel our plans for the day. However, Gary suggested, why not leave her at my parents' house? Honestly, I don't have a good relationship with my in-laws. They don't think they need to respect their son's wife. To them, since I'm married into the family, they can say whatever they want. What century are they living in? I felt uncomfortable asking them to babysit a 3-year-old, but if we postponed our plans, it would delay finishing our house. Despite my doubts, we decided to leave Sarah with my in-laws for the day. After we finished our tasks, we stopped at a store and bought some expensive pastries as a thank you gift, then went straight to my in-laws' house. When we arrived that evening, maybe because of the gift, they seemed to be in a good mood. After thanking my mother-in-law and father-in-law, on our way home Sarah asked, "Where's Grandpa and Grandma's room in our new house?" "Sweetie, what do you mean? Did Grandpa and Grandma ask you that?" "What did you tell them?" I asked. "I told them I didn't know," she replied, then went back to talking with her stuffed penguin she calls my parents. Granddad and Granny, so Grandpa and Grandma would refer to Gary's parents. Perhaps they were wondering if there's a guest room for them in our new house. At least, that's what I thought back then. After that day, my in-laws started visiting frequently, especially in the evenings on weekdays or holidays when we were home. Right now, we're living in a small, older apartment to save money for our house. Whenever my in-laws came over, they would immediately sit down on our dining chairs or sofa, asking to see the blueprints and paperwork for our house that was still being built. Before I could say anything, Gary would eagerly show them everything, explaining in detail. Why does he show them every time? It's already exhausting. They visited so often that my mother-in-law bombarded me with questions. It felt like I was being interrogated in a congressional hearing. It wasn't my husband in the hot seat, but me. I could almost hear the debate moderator saying, "Mil, you may speak." She would scrutinize the blueprint, pointing out flaws in the kitchen's layout and insisting we needed more guest rooms. She'd argue about the need for spare space and even joke about the declining birth rate, thankfully not seriously asking for my thoughts on it. Then it was my turn to respond. "Ms. Abigail, I'd say based on our discussions with my husband and the construction plans we've already set in motion, it's too late to change the layout." But my frustration grew as more questions followed about furniture and appliances. My mother-in-law claims to be a home expert. I've visited many friends' homes and seen different room setups. With that experience, I can easily recognize comfortable rooms and quality furniture. "This house and these rooms don't feel right, they have bad vibes, so things won't go smoothly," she declared with expert emphasis. It was a bit much, considering she's just my mother-in-law. She was so irritating that I jokingly suggested, "What if we turn it into a multi-generational home and split the costs 50-50ths? But my in-laws didn't find it funny. "Are you asking us for money, you ungrateful child? A multi-generational home? I hate the idea of living so formally and reserved." That day they left early. Good riddance, you're not my real parents, and I don't owe you any respect. Instead of parents, they're more like guardians. Later that night, after putting our daughter to bed, my husband came to me looking frustrated. "Mom and Dad mean well, so don't be so distant with them." Cold? I didn't mean to come off that way, but aren't your parents being a bit rude? They constantly interfere with our decisions about our home. It's like they always look down on me, see me just as their daughter-in-law. That's just how parents are. It feels disrespectful to dismiss their advice like that. Don't you understand how that feels? Take a moment to think about it calmly. From then on, my husband turned away and didn't speak to me. I know they're your parents, but we're a separate household, and they haven't given us any financial support. They don't contribute financially but still have a lot to say. Isn't that unfair? My husband told me to calm down, but instead of cooling off, I was boiling with anger over the injustice, which made it hard to sleep. After some ups and downs, our house was finally finished. Just as our family was happily moving in, something unexpected happened. My parents are moving in with us starting today. Dad can take the bigger room upstairs and Mom will be fine in the smaller one. Wait a minute. Hold on. Where is this coming from? We agreed that one of the upstairs rooms would be for Sarah. I never heard anything about this. Plus, what if your parents decide they don't like the rooms? They might not say anything, but they've already seen them. Your parents checked out the rooms the day before we did. Wait, they saw the house before us? Yeah, they wanted to see it, so I gave them my key. It's not a big deal, my husband replied, clearly annoyed as he returned to working on the half-done TV cables. Not a big deal? Well, it is now. It's become a really big deal. I didn't want to see my husband's face, so I left the kitchen where I was packing and went upstairs. I locked myself in the room, trying to clear my head amidst the mix of anger and confusion. Thankfully, I had already dropped Sarah off at daycare, giving me some space and time to think amidst all the unpacking. The sudden news about living with my in-laws made me completely fed up with both my husband and his parents. I didn't want to spend another moment with them, but we had just invested significantly in this house. I needed to calm down and think rationally. I had to figure out what needed to be said and what didn't for the sake of my daughter and myself. I stayed in my room, deep in thought, waiting for my in-laws to arrive as my husband had mentioned they would be coming in the afternoon with a truck full of their belongings. You could at least greet us. Honestly, such rude people. Oh my, nothing's unpacked yet? You're so slow. I overheard my in-laws complain as they made themselves at home downstairs. I decided to go downstairs and face them at the entrance. Excuse me, but I wasn't informed about this living arrangement, I said, my voice unexpectedly cold. My father-in-law appeared annoyed and shot back, I told Gary, that should be enough. No, it's not. This morning was the first I heard about your plan to move in from Gary. I have no intention of living with you, especially after such disrespect. What? Gary agreed to it. You think you can defy your husband like that? Such a presumptuous daughter-in-law. If you don't like it, maybe you should leave. This is hopeless. We've always struggled to communicate properly with them. As I pondered my next words, my husband rushed over. What's going on, Abigail? Why are you arguing with my parents? This isn't just an argument. I'm being criticized simply for being your daughter-in-law, and now you're blaming me too. I realized once again Gary was just like his father, like son. Gary, I can't possibly live with your parents. Why not? You're making this difficult for me. As your wife, I'm an individual person. You can't force me to obey. Upon hearing our exchange, Gary's father exclaimed, We don't need such a daughter-in-law in our home. Then Gary agreed, Maybe you're right. If she can't respect my parents, maybe we should divorce. I had been waiting for this. All right, let's get a divorce then, I stated clearly. My husband was the one who asked for divorce, and I, the wife, just agreed to what he wanted. With hope that my phone in my pocket would record our entire conversation properly, I continued, Since we'll be strangers now, please pay me back the $350,000 I loaned you for this house's construction. His parents gasped in shock, looking completely baffled. Gary's face turned pale as he stared at me. I calmly clarified to his stunned parents, there seems to be some confusion. Gary didn't contribute a single cent to buying this house. I used my savings because he didn't have any savings. We both worked and split our living expenses equally. The plan was to save individually, but he spent his money instead of saving. Abigail, that's enough, Gary interjected. It's true. Yet when we bought the house, Gary insisted it be in his name. That's why I loaned him the money, and we have a written agreement to prove it. No way, Gary exclaimed. Ignoring their disbelief, I quickly packed essentials, my daughter's toys and clothes, into suitcases and duffel bags. I held her favorite stuffed penguin clothes. Loading everything into my compact car, I drove away, saying goodbye to the house we had briefly called home. After picking up my daughter from daycare, we headed to my parents' home in Nebraska. My parents, dressed casually, were surprised to see me arrive with so much luggage. This is sudden, and I know it might be inconvenient. If it's too much trouble, I can stay at a motel, I offered hesitantly. They quickly assured me it was fine. Later, I found out they had been worried I might harm my daughter or myself, though I had sworn to protect her no matter what. I shared the whole story with them, explaining my decision to divorce Gary and my determination to raise our daughter alone. They promised full support and suggested I stay with them for a while, which was a great relief. Since I was working that night, I documented everything that had happened between Gary, his parents, and me. I saved voice recordings of our conversations on my computer and external drive. Armed with this evidence, I visited several law firms on my days off until I found a trustworthy lawyer and officially hired them. A week flew by in the hustle of everyday life since I left our new house. That day, after finishing work and leaving the office, I was surprised to find someone waiting for me. It was my husband, or rather ex-husband, though technically still my husband on paper until the divorce was finalized. I had no intention of speaking with him, but the fear of potential aggression kept me on edge. So I thought we should go somewhere public, he suggested, and we entered a coffee shop together. I made sure to activate the recording function on my phone, just in case. Trying to remain calm, I asked, Do you have something to discuss? Yes, about the house. I'll transfer it to you and change the name on the deed. Can we consider the money issue settled? I'm sorry, but I can't live in that house anymore, especially after your parents were there before us. Why worry about such details? It's not a small thing for me, so the answer is no, I said firmly, taking a sip of my coffee as I observed my ex-husband closely. His hair was messy, sticking out in places, and he had some stubble on his chin. Despite wearing a suit, his shirt was wrinkled, as if it hadn't been ironed or cleaned properly. I wondered about the kind of life he was leading, but he looked worn out. Please, Abigail, I can't repay such a large sum of money that easily. You knew it was a significant amount when you borrowed it, didn't you? I suggested we put both our names on the house, or even just mine, but you insisted it be in your name, claiming it was my house. I thought I was the homeowner. I never really intended to get a divorce. I thought you knew I was just bluffing. I was serious. I'm done with you and I'm definitely getting a divorce. It's not just about your lack of responsibility. I can't handle your rude parents either. But I have to go. Sarah is waiting for me. Wait, I'm taking Sarah with me. Fear gripped me at my ex-husband's words. When I returned to my parents' house, I asked them to be cautious, afraid he might try to take Sarah by force. A few days after my ex-husband's visit, I received word that my in-laws were at Sarah's daycare. I left work early and hurried to the daycare. Fortunately, I had informed them beforehand, so they had my in-laws waiting in a separate room where they couldn't see Sarah. As soon as I entered the room with my in-laws, they started shouting at me. "Give us our granddaughter back, you gold-digging thief." "What do you mean, thief? I haven't stolen anything." "If you're not a thief, then you must be a con artist. You must have done something shady to get that kind of money at your age. It doesn't make sense for you to have so much money." "No, all the money I lent to Gary was mine. It's all from my hard work, my savings, and the gift money from my parents and grandmother." "What gift money?" "Every year my parents gifted me a certain amount to avoid taxes, which was directly deposited into my account. Along with money from selling some stocks and my savings, that's where it all came from." "So all that money really was yours. Didn't you give any money as a gift to Gary?" "You can still make gifts, you know." My father-in-law grunted and fell silent. They like to spend on expensive things and show off, enjoying luxury above all. As a regular working-class family without passive income, it's clear they probably don't have much in savings. They would never have thought to give money like my parents did. "I'm sorry, but I'm divorcing Gary. I'll be taking custody of Sarah. Please don't come to the daycare anymore." With that, I quickly got Sarah into the car and drove straight to my parents' home. Despite my warnings, Gary and my in-laws continued to show up several times after that. Each time, I tried to stay calm and send them away. However, they often grabbed my arm or shouted hurtful things at me. After I left our new home, I meticulously recorded everything on my phone. About a month later, I sent a letter through my lawyer demanding repayment of debts and a divorce agreement. My ex-husband agreed in principle, but he contested custody of Sarah. However, when I mentioned alimony, his demeanor changed drastically. He looked pale and became much quieter. Armed with ample evidence against him and knowing he had no savings, I pursued my case diligently. It took some time, but I eventually won custody of Sarah, reclaimed the money I had loaned to my ex-husband, and finalized the divorce. Retrieving all the debt repayments from him took longer than expected, mainly because the sale of our new house encountered difficulties initially. I had fought against Gary and his parents moving into the new house, but they couldn't afford the $350,000. Gary lacked savings, and even if his parents sold their old home, it wouldn't cover the cost. Eventually, they had to list the new house for less than they bought it for. After several price drops, they finally found a buyer. The difference between the buying and selling prices, along with real estate commissions, was borrowed from the bank by my ex-husband. Losing the house and burdened with debt, my ex-husband ended up moving back in with his parents into their old run-down house. To make matters worse, Gary's divorced sister also moved back in with her 2 teenage sons. Now 6 people were squeezed into a small old home. It quickly gained a reputation in the neighborhood for constant arguments and tension. Fortunately, that family no longer bothered us. With Gary struggling to afford child support, it's no surprise he's kept a low profile. 4 years have passed since then, and my daughter Sarah is now in 2nd grade. We're renting a place near my parents' home, and on days when I'm late from work, they look after Sarah. Despite the challenges, we're managing well and enjoying our time together. I had thought I might stay single and continue living like this forever, but recently I've started dating someone. He's a 36-year-old man who was previously married and has a daughter in 1st grade. We got to know each other through school drop-offs and pickups, and he eventually expressed his feelings for me. Lately, we've been going out together with our daughters. The other day, Sarah casually mentioned, if we ever build a house, it'd be nice if all 4 of us had our own rooms, and maybe we could get a dog. My heart skipped a beat. In fact, he had proposed to me not long ago. Both of us have daughters, and they come first in our decisions, so I haven't given him a definite answer yet. But now, I've made up my mind. I hugged Sarah tightly and said, "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to build a new home. This time we'll all discuss it together as a family and make sure it's a place where everyone can be happy."
My name is Gracie. I'm 27 years old, and I work both at home and in an office. My husband, Aaron, is the same age as me. He loves his mother a lot, but his mom, Eliza, tends to be quite mean to me. Even though our marriage has had its problems, we just celebrated our 2nd anniversary, and I'm proud of how I've managed to handle everything. Work has become my way of relaxing. Because of this, I've been getting promoted frequently, which is rare for women. Right now, I'm on a business trip traveling around Europe for meetings. I'm currently in an important meeting. During the meeting, my phone, which was on silent, started vibrating. I thought it might be an emergency because I had 2 missed calls. When I checked my phone, I saw that the calls were from my mother-in-law, Eliza. What's going on? I thought, worried that something might be wrong. I quickly decided to call back. Just as I was about to leave my desk, Eliza called again. "Hello, Gracie. Where are you?" she asked, sounding annoyed. I picked up the call and wasn't happy with the tone of her voice. Maybe I shouldn't have answered this, I muttered. Hi, Eliza. How are you? Is there something urgent? Why aren't you answering me? I asked where you are, she said, sounding impatient. Even though her attitude annoyed me, I was in the middle of an important meeting and didn't want to argue. So I said softly, sorry, didn't Aaron tell you? I'm in a meeting on a business trip. Can I call you back when I'm done? Of course, Aaron told me. What are you doing, leaving your house and husband alone? Come back home right now. Eliza demanded, with her usual sudden and unreasonable request. I'm sorry, Eliza, but I'm in an important meeting and I can't just. I started to explain, but she cut me off. You're so bossy, even though you're just Aaron's wife. I don't care about your excuses. Just come home right now. Today is very important. Do you understand? What? Today is important? I asked, surprised. Eliza finally admitted, we're celebrating my 60th birthday today. She said this in a smug tone. I remembered her birthday was supposed to be at the end of the month. I was surprised to hear it was today, especially since I was on a business trip. My husband and I had already planned a special dinner for her birthday at a nice restaurant. I was fed up with Eliza trying to boss me around again. It seemed like she was getting worse every year, especially when she knew I was busy with important work. I told her, as I've mentioned, I'm on a business trip, so I can't come home. Oh, that's funny, she said. I called Aaron earlier, and he said he'd take a day off for me. All the relatives will be there, but you, Gracie, always working. You're so cold. How do you feel about your husband's family? I knew if I listened to her much longer, her sarcasm would just continue. Since I was still in a meeting, I couldn't stay on the phone with her, so I said, I'm sorry, but no matter what you say, I can't make it to your 60th birthday celebration. Eliza's tone changed abruptly. She took a deep breath and said, Fine then, I won't consider you family. Don't come back home. It's a divorce. Aaron deserves better. Her harsh words hit me hard. I was both angry and upset, but I didn't want to argue with her on the phone. I said, all right, I'll talk to you when I get home. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Eliza snapped, what's with that attitude? I told you not to come back. I'll talk to Aaron myself. Then she hung up. I was exhausted from dealing with my mother-in-law. I returned to the meeting with a deep sigh. After 2 days of meetings, I finally made it home. On the way back, I was so angry and frustrated with my mother-in-law that I barely remembered how I got home. When I opened the front door and called out, I heard my husband's tired voice say, Welcome back. I took off my heels and went straight to the living room, leaving my luggage at the door. There, I saw a stack of cardboard boxes and my husband, Aaron, sweating as he taped them up. What's with all the boxes? I asked. Aaron told me the boxes were packed with my things. He explained that Eliza had indeed celebrated her 60th birthday on the day she called me, without me. She told everyone that I had neglected her birthday and was rude on the phone. Eliza even told the relatives she wanted me to be divorced and sent back to my parents' house because I wasn't good enough for her son. This sounded exactly like something my mother-in-law would do, so I asked Aaron, and then what happened? Did your mother tell you to get a divorce and you agreed to it? No, I didn't exactly agree, Aaron said. But she told me to pack up your stuff, and I didn't have much choice. What could I do? He stopped taping up the boxes and spoke in a tired voice. What do you mean? You didn't argue with your mother? Does that mean you're okay with the idea of getting a divorce? Aaron explained that his father, Alex, had also told him, if Eliza's upset, it'll be tough for you, so you better do what she says. So Aaron went along with the divorce. I couldn't believe he was accepting the divorce so easily. What is wrong with Aaron's family? His father is controlled by his mother, and Aaron blindly obeys her too. It felt like no one was on my side. When I was at a loss for words, Aaron said, What my mother says is final. It's only until she calms down and things settle. This divorce isn't real. I'll come for you when things are better. He looked at me with pleading eyes. I wish he would show that kind of pleading to his own mother. How could a grown man like Aaron be so afraid of his mom? I thought, there's no saving this. I almost felt ashamed, questioning what I ever saw in him. But then I realized maybe this was an opportunity. Staying with Aaron would only mean more torment from Eliza, always pushing me toward a divorce. Maybe it was actually lucky to get a divorce from him without much hassle. I could support myself just fine. Even if I lived alone, I wouldn't lack for anything. Suddenly, everything seemed clearer. I looked at Aaron and said, "Fine, let's get a divorce." Right after that, I called Eliza. After 3 tries, she finally picked up. "Hello," Eliza answered. I said quietly, "As you wish, we're getting a divorce." Eliza, sounding triumphant, replied in a bouncy tone, "Yes, please, leave. Finally, you've realized you're not good enough for Aaron." I'm so relieved. "Don't worry, I'll find him a new wife who's obedient, pretty, and nice to her in-laws." She continued, "I'm sure Aaron will be popular. I'll take care of him until he finds his next wife, so don't worry about that." After she finished with her sarcasm, I told Eliza, "Well, don't misunderstand me, Mother." Eliza, still in a good mood, responded, "Oh, you're just a sore loser. Don't worry about me." "Oh, and Gracie," she added, "I got the divorce papers from the city office and gave them to Aaron. Don't forget to sign them." Then, without another word, she hung up. Aaron, who had been listening to my conversation with Eliza, looked relieved. I thought, is Aaron really that clueless? I asked him, "By the way, does your mother know you're a full-time house husband?" He replied, "How could I tell her that? My mother is obsessed with the idea that I'm a high-ranking employee at a big company." He said this with a firm tone. "Oh, right," I said. "Now that I think about it, you've never been honest with Eliza. You always wear a worn-out sweatshirt at home, but you change into a suit whenever you go out to see her. You also pretend not to be home when she calls, making her think you're at work." Eliza had boasted at her 60th birthday party that Aaron was such a devoted son he took time off just to attend her celebration. She also mentioned that with his status, he could easily find a more obedient and attractive wife than me. I'm sure the truth will come out once we're divorced. But Eliza, who believes her son is perfect, would never expect that Aaron had actually quit his job at the major company. Aaron had actually quit his job about a year ago. What Eliza saw as her elite son, a symbol of high status, was now just an unemployed full-time house husband. Aaron lost his job after a major mistake led to a written apology, a demotion, and a pay cut. He probably didn't tell his mother about this. Aaron must have been deeply shocked by his fall from the elite path. Since Eliza had always pampered and spoiled him, he became quite fragile and sensitive. Just the thought of going back to the office to deal with the consequences of his mistake made him feel anxious and sick. He couldn't even leave the house, let alone go to work. Initially, Aaron tried to report his absences and applied for paid leave, but eventually he stopped even calling in. As his unauthorized absences piled up, he got fired. Now, he seems to have no plans to look for another job and is heavily relying on my income. Aaron hasn't told Eliza about this because he knows she would be furious and upset. I was a bit disappointed I wouldn't get to see Eliza's reaction when she discovered Aaron's situation after I left. I imagined she'd be shocked, maybe even have a stroke, but that was no longer my concern. Aaron handed me the divorce papers and said, "This is just a cover to convince my mother, okay?" I quickly submitted the papers and signed a lease for a new apartment, moving in as soon as possible. A month later, I got a call from Eliza, even though I thought I cut ties with her for good. Curious about what she wanted, I answered, "What do you want now? Aren't you happy to be rid of me?" I said with a hint of sarcasm. Eliza replied, "You're still the same. Just listen to me." She continued in her usual tone, talking about Aaron. After I left, Eliza had visited Aaron's apartment several times to help with chores. Each time she found him just lounging around in his room with no sign of him going to work. Since he didn't seem sick, she asked me if I had any idea what was going on. I held back a laugh and replied casually, I see. Well, Aaron's like that because he has no intention of working again." Eliza seemed to have forgotten she was the one who'd kicked me out and asked, "Gracie, can you do something about it?" "Why should I?" "You didn't want me in your family and wanted nothing to do with me," I said. It was so typical of her to ask for something only when it suited her after mistreating me for so long. She then said, "I was wondering if you said something to Aaron before you left." I couldn't believe how she was trying to make me the bad guy. Doesn't she see the problem is with her son, not me? I'm the one who was hurt here, you know. "Oh, really?" Eliza said. "You only married Aaron for a luxurious life, right? So why would a divorce be so painful for you?" She looked at me as if I'd married Aaron just for his money. Are you kidding me? I was the one supporting Aaron financially during our marriage. I was the one providing for him. In reality, I couldn't afford to live extravagantly because of Aaron. I was fine with the divorce, but should I consider asking for alimony? Eliza couldn't believe what I said. How dare you make up something like that? Gracie, you just forgot to ask for alimony, didn't you? Aaron has a higher income and position than you. Don't be so unreasonable. If you want money, Aaron can pay whatever you want. After all, Aaron is a high-level employee at a major company. Eliza's argument was as outrageous as ever. Maybe Aaron hadn't told her the truth yet. I didn't want to seem like I was just tattling, but I saw an opportunity to get back at her. So I told her, your proud son is actually a full-time house husband. He quit his job a long time ago. What? You're lying. Eliza shouted, unable to accept what I said. Her voice was so loud, I thought it might damage my eardrums. I held the phone away from my ear and said, why don't you check with the company? You'll find out who's telling the truth. Eliza went silent for a moment. Then she said, well, what if that's true? How are we going to manage? I can't support my son on just my pension, and no one will want to marry him if he's unemployed. What are we going to do? Her voice had clearly softened, and I couldn't help but grin. What shall we do? I asked. Eliza was silent for a moment, then mumbled something with someone beside her. Finally, she said, hey Gracie, will you please come back home? I was puzzled by her sudden change of tone, but replied firmly, no, we're already divorced. I wouldn't come back to your family if heaven and earth turned upside down. Then I heard commotion in the background. Someone was shouting. It sounded like Aaron. I told you I'd come for you when things settled down. Aaron's voice rang out. Eliza responded, yes, yes. You could remarry my son if you wanted. What are you talking about? I asked. No way. I wouldn't do it for the world. Don't joke about this. Thanks, but seriously, no. I made it clear to Eliza that I wasn't interested in getting involved with her son or dealing with any more toxic relationships. I wanted nothing to do with someone who adored his mother too much. I did what you asked me to do, so please stop changing your mind, I said. Eliza replied, but there's a bit of verbal sparring here. It's not like you should take my words so seriously. You've been talking back to me with a nonchalant attitude, haven't you? I didn't think you'd actually go through with divorcing my son. It seemed she hadn't expected me to reject her offer so firmly. In response to Eliza's bitter excuses, I said, well, I was just putting up with it. Besides, Aaron packed up my things and kicked me out without consulting me. I let out my frustration, listing everything she had done to me. You see, that was just a prank, she said. A prank? It's worse than that, I said, feeling completely fed up. There was nothing more to say. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly 1 o'clock. My lunch break had been wasted on this pointless conversation. Eliza, are you done now? I asked. What, Gracie? What did you say? She replied, her voice still annoyingly sweet. Did Eliza really think a sweet voice would get her a good answer? Knowing I wouldn't meet her expectations, I said, I'm going to hang up now. I have another meeting in a few minutes and need to review some documents. As I started to disconnect the call, Eliza kept insisting, wait, Gracie. Hey, Gracie, say something. I could hear her shouting, and she also scolded Aaron, saying, you didn't handle this right, and look what happened. It was clear that Eliza blames everyone else for her problems. I was so fed up with her that I ended the call and blocked her number. Afterward, Aaron tried to contact me constantly. Seizing the opportunity, I asked my lawyer to pursue alimony. Aaron's family, probably nervous about legal action, quickly paid the alimony in a lump sum. It seemed my ex-parents-in-law advanced the money. Because of this, Alex and Eliza were constantly irritated with Aaron, telling him daily to find a job and work, which Aaron was fed up with. The former Elites had fallen far from their previous status. Aaron ended up moving back to his parents' house because he couldn't afford his apartment rent. He blamed his parents for his divorce and was now draining their pension and retirement savings. Like mother, like son, they blamed each other for their problems and refused to reflect on their own actions. They were even planning to apply for welfare soon. I hope the government will help them realize that they can't continue their selfish ways. As for me, the proposal I made during my business trip was accepted, leading to a major contract being signed. I was promoted again, received a higher salary, and now enjoy a rich bachelorette life, free from in-laws' torment and financial dependency on a family member. If I ever consider marriage again, I'll definitely do a thorough background check to avoid any mama's boys or crazy in-laws.
My name is Mia. I'm 24 years old and work full-time. I've been dating a guy at work who's a year older than me for 3 years now, and we've decided to get married. In public, my mom behaved very differently. It happened when my boyfriend was around. I was prepared for her to say something mean to him, but she surprised me by being kind. The reason behind her behavior was that my boyfriend's dad held a high position in a big company, and my boyfriend was going to join that company after gaining more experience at his current job. My mom was thinking about the future and wanted to improve her image now so she could get help later on. Because my boyfriend believed my mom's act completely, I couldn't talk to him about what my mom was really like. My sister has always treated me like I'm beneath her. She would make fun of me, pointing out how differently our parents treated us. I have an older sister who's 3 years older than me. She's already married and lives away from our family home. I still live with our parents. My mom especially favors my sister a lot, which has always been clear to me. Even though my dad also seems to prefer my sister, he does care about me too, which is reassuring. I've been eager to move out of my parents' house and live with my boyfriend, but my mom won't let me for some reason. Even though my sister moved out to live with her husband before they got married, I can't understand why I'm not allowed to do the same. I think part of it is because my mom wants me around to help out at home, but part of it feels like she's being unfair. In public, my mom behaved very differently. It happened when my boyfriend was around. I was prepared for her to say something mean to him, but she surprised me by being kind. The reason behind her behavior was that my boyfriend's dad held a high position in a big company, and my boyfriend was going to join that company after gaining more experience at his current job. My mom was thinking about the future and wanted to improve her image now so she could get help later on. Because my boyfriend believed my mom's act completely, I couldn't talk to him about what my mom was really like. My sister has always treated me like I'm beneath her. She would make fun of me, pointing out how differently our parents treated us. I was fed up with my older sister who always acted like she was better than me, even though she's just 4 years older. She married a guy who's 2 years older than her and works for a well-known company, earning a good salary. She never let me forget it. But once she found out my boyfriend would soon work for his dad, an executive at a big company, she stopped bragging about her husband. My sister used to visit our parents almost every weekday. I'm not sure what she did with our stay-at-home mom, but when I got home from work, she'd look at me with pity and wouldn't offer any comfort. I work too, so I managed to save a bit of money each month for my future. It's not much, but it adds up. My sister, on the other hand, doesn't need to work because her husband earns enough. She's proud of their lifestyle, even though she didn't earn that money herself. "Have you saved any money for your future?" she asked me once. "Well, sort of. I have some in a bank account," I replied. "I withdrew it once for wedding expenses and it's safe for now. We're also saving for the wedding, so I'm doing some calculations." "I see," my mom remarked. "There was money in the safe." "Yes, temporarily," I said. I wondered why she was asking, but it turned out to cause a big argument later on. The expenses for our wedding were supposed to be shared by both families, but since his parents were more enthusiastic about the ceremony, they agreed to cover a larger portion. We decided to handle the down payment ourselves. When my sister got married, her in-laws also contributed significantly, which was a relief for our modest family. About a month later, as usual, my sister stormed into our family home. However, what caught my attention this time was her car. The car was parked proudly, almost flaunting itself. It was a popular model. I assumed she had bought it with her husband's money, but this time it was different. "Mia, have you seen my car?" "Huh? Your car?" I hadn't noticed." "That's good. Mom bought it for me." I was quite surprised. I couldn't help but wonder where the money came from. It wasn't a luxury car, but it was a new model worth nearly $30,000. I was astonished by how much my family favored my sister, even buying her a car. It was shocking. "You must be happy about this, right? Don't forget to thank Mia." "What? Why should she thank me?" I was completely baffled by what Mom was saying, but they both gave me a sly smile. "That's right. We used your money to buy it." "Huh? Thanks a lot, Mia." I didn't understand what they were talking about, and I felt confused. "The $30,000 in the safe, we used it to buy your sister's car. That was supposed to be your wedding fund, but it's okay, right? We're family," Mom said, giving me a mean grin. "But that wasn't my money. It wasn't even for my wedding." "Huh?" Mom's expression turned serious instantly. Thinking back on it now, it almost makes me laugh. My sister beside me was also surprised. I had already managed my money and returned it to my bank account. I hadn't even saved up to $30,000. But for some reason Mom was looking at me skeptically. Dad mentioned he hadn't withdrawn the wedding expenses yet. So isn't that different money in the safe? As we looked at each other, Mom and my sister seemed to be trying to piece together what they knew about whose money it was. "I can't confirm whose it is," I said, but Mom thought I was bluffing and smirked at my uncertainty. I had seen an envelope marked $30,000 when I borrowed the safe from Dad before, so it's definitely not my money. "Anyway," they said, "we're grateful to you, Mia. Take good care of the car. It's wrong to lay hands on someone else's money without permission." They both misunderstood things and just let the conversation drop, but Mom will regret this big mistake she made. My sister drove home in her new car and Mom went out shopping. I was left alone in the living room, feeling more and more eager to leave this house as soon as possible. Looking back, neither my mother nor my sister ever congratulated me on my upcoming marriage. Mom made a big deal out of my sister's wedding, celebrating joyfully when she heard the news. Meanwhile, both my sister and Mom practically pressured me into giving a $1,000 gift. Mom was thrilled and closely followed the details of my sister's wedding, eagerly looking at photos of the venue. However, when it came to my wedding, which was planned to be much more modest and affordable compared to my sister's lavish affair, she clearly showed her disappointment and gave me a cold response. Regardless, even before my sister got married, I had to endure constant bragging about her husband's income, looks, and personality. Information I never asked for kept coming my way. She would say things like, "Honestly, I doubt you'll ever find someone as amazing as my guy." It's the kind of thing a sister should never say to her younger sibling. I focused on my work, hoping to one day look back on my tough life at my parents' house and how I met my current boyfriend. He's a high achiever at our workplace, where we both work. As I mentioned earlier, he's soon moving to a major corporation where his father is an executive. Our current job is subcontracted by his father's company, so we earn a decent income. Initially, the company was discussing how much my boyfriend would transfer to his father's company after gaining experience at our current workplace. Supporting my boyfriend's growth and ensuring a smooth transition would benefit our business relationship with clients. When my sister first found out that my boyfriend worked at the same company as me, she made a rude comment, saying, "He's just like you." However, after I explained his future prospects, she went quiet. It might be because the company he's moving to is even bigger than my brother-in-law's company. My sister's patronizing attitude hasn't changed since we were kids. Our parents always favored her, buying her any toy she wanted without question. My dad, feeling sorry for me, would spend time playing with me. But my sister, who's good at pleasing others, sometimes manipulated him to keep us apart. I really dislike my sister. She's outgoing and talks energetically, whereas I'm not exactly introverted, but I'm quiet and often felt pressured to cater to my sister's preferences. From my mom's perspective, I always seem dissatisfied. While that perception isn't entirely wrong, I believe my mother misunderstands my true character. A week after my sister flaunted her new car, she came home as usual, and both she and my mother were relaxing in the living room while I stayed in my room. Suddenly, the door to my father's room next to mine swung open, and I heard him hurrying down the stairs. I could hear my father raising his voice, so I went downstairs to see what was happening. He was questioning my mother and sister alternately. It was there. I'm sure it wasn't there." "No, really? In what form?" "In an envelope." "Hey Mia, have you been in the safe lately?" "I only took out some money when you asked me to." My sister was clearly flustered and kept glancing outside, towards her new car. "Mia, do you know anything about this?" My mother looked at me with a shocked expression. Her face seemed to say, "Don't say a word, Mom and Sis already know more about this." "Wait, hold on, what are you implying?" "I have nothing to do with this. What are you talking about?" Despite them revealing the source and use of the money to me, I was shocked by their audacity to pretend they didn't know. "And that car," I pointed at my sister's new car. "Tell me Mom didn't buy that for you as a gift, right?" My mother's face went pale, and my sister looked like she wanted to disappear. It was the first time I'd seen such expressions on their faces. "That envelope is Mia's money, isn't it?" I asked. "But Mia just said she took it out of the safe, so whose money is it, if not Mia's? She's been saving it. I haven't withdrawn it yet. What's going on?" "Even if it's Mia's, you used it without permission." My mom kept stealing glances at my sister, who avoided eye contact. This is typical of my sister's behavior. Mom must be shocked because that money was supposed to be for renovating the house to make it accessible for our parents. I knew Mom had been urging Dad to let her mother live with us. She wanted to care for our grandmother, who had become frail after losing our grandfather a few years ago. While Dad's parents were well supported by nearby siblings, Mom had no siblings and her mother lived alone, so she hoped her mother could move in with us. We were even planning to make our home accessible to accommodate her. My parents believed that preparing the house now would be beneficial as they grew older. The $30,000 was specifically set aside for this purpose. My mother had mistaken it for my savings. "Now what are we going to do? You knew we needed that money to make the house accessible, right?" We've already signed the contract, and construction starts next month. What's the plan now? Dad's angry questions overwhelmed Mom, leaving her tearful. My sister remained indifferent as usual. We'll have to cancel the renovations, Mom whispered sadly. No, absolutely not. Then Grandma can't move in. You need to talk to your parents. Can't we find another solution? Dad slammed his hand on the table, raising his voice. This is no joke. You need to figure this out. The only option left is to sell the car. Wait a minute, selling the car isn't an option. Can't we find another way, maybe borrow from another source? Please, help us. I can't face my husband with this, pleaded Mom, now at odds with my sister after being so united in pressuring me earlier. Dad watched them with disbelief. Mom, realizing the gravity of her irreversible actions, was in dire straits, her plans to care for her parents now shattered. My sister attempted to play innocent with Dad, but he wasn't buying it this time. It was clear, the new car parked outside was bought with the money from our safe, and Dad was growing tired of her attempts to avoid responsibility. But you agreed to Grandma moving in. You promised to take care of Mom. Why the sudden change? Dad's frustration grew. Your parents are fine, with siblings nearby. My mom is alone, with no one close by. It was true, Mom's family lived out of state, far away, but now she was reacting out of desperation. Dad became even angrier, and a heated argument erupted, fueled by the financial betrayal. Blame was unfairly falling on Dad. Seeing my sister try to slip away, I quietly moved the car keys to Dad's side, preventing her escape. If you're insisting on Grandma moving in, then take responsibility for it. What you did is no different from theft, I asserted firmly. Mom looked down, appearing resigned. Dad clarified that the money Mom used for the car was from the safe, and my sister was equally responsible. This angered my sister. Dad, you've always been too forgiving of her, I said, my expression stern. Don't you think it's unfair? Even Mom misunderstood. It's clear Dad is troubled by my sister, who never seems to learn. She's stubbornly defensive, especially when it comes to me. Just because it's my money doesn't give you the right to use it. I'm not the villain here. And what's with Mia marrying a man with a bright future? He's just benefiting from our parents' connections. I've always endured how my sister treated me, but this time, I couldn't take it anymore. Isn't it strange how your husband's family spoils him like that? I don't need lectures from someone as spoiled and naive as you. Even Mom, Dad, and my sister were taken aback by my outburst of anger. Who are you calling naive and disgusting? I'm talking to you, the one who doesn't appreciate Mom, who bought you a car, and only cares about herself. My frustration peaked, causing my sister to step back. By the way, my boyfriend's father is the executive at your husband's main client. I proposed a solution to Dad. At first he was surprised, but since it came from me, he, considering me the victim, accepted it. A week later, Mom announced she was giving up on the idea of living together. But Dad intervened. You have $10,000 in your account, right? Take it all out. With that, Dad retrieved the blueprint and cost estimate for the construction. The initial estimate was $30,000, but by opting for less expensive plumbing fixtures, it could be reduced to $25,000. Mom listened quietly to Dad's explanation, nodding in agreement. I can manage $10,000, which leaves enough for Maya's wedding, but I can't cover more than that. We're still $5,000 short, Mom admitted, sounding resigned as she looked down. The remaining $5,000 will have to come from Mia, Dad stated firmly. What? Grandma's situation shouldn't be blamed, and Mom would be in trouble, right? This money is my safety net, saved up in case of emergencies. Mom covered her face with both hands, tears streaming down as she nodded. Go ahead with it, Dad, I said. Are you sure about this? Dad asked, seeking confirmation. I nodded in agreement. Mom continued to bow her head, expressing her gratitude. I've been cold to Mia all this time, causing her discomfort. I thought it was justified to use her money because it was hers, despite my behavior, and yet, she sobbed, taking my hand. I'm really sorry. Thank you so much. In return, make sure you celebrate my wedding properly, as any mother should. After making some adjustments to the construction plan, the work began on schedule. The renovations went smoothly, and it was decided that my grandmother would soon move in with us. As for my sister, she didn't visit our parents' house for a while, but apparently she did apologize to them. While she didn't apologize directly to me, it seems she acknowledged her mistakes. Mom completely changed her attitude towards me, interacting in a much kinder manner. Perhaps it's because of the money and her feelings of remorse. As planned, my wedding went ahead smoothly. Both Mom and Dad appeared genuinely happy. Meanwhile, my sister's husband was busy ingratiating himself with my fiance's father, bowing respectfully and serving him drinks. It was quite a sight to see my sister's surprised expression when she realized my earlier concerns were true. With that, our family's major issue was resolved, and it seemed to bring closure to the challenges in my life as well. Interestingly, during the wedding, when a picture of my sister lovingly doting on me as a baby was projected, it seemed my sister quietly shed a few tears.
People who come in small, cheap cars often leave right away. For my mom's 60th birthday, I decided to take her and my daughter to a fancy restaurant that's always busy, but something unexpected happened. The restaurant manager started making fun of us, saying we looked poor. "Let's just go," my mom said angrily, but the manager just smiled meanly. Then all the other customers stood up together, glaring at the manager. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm 28 years old, a single mom with a 3-year-old daughter. I separated from my husband because we had different values. After that, I decided to raise my daughter alone. When I told my mom, she welcomed us warmly. All the stress I had been feeling came out, and I started crying. Seeing me like that, my mom invited us to live with her. She's been alone since my dad passed away a few years ago. She said she'd be happy to have us, so I accepted her kind offer. My mother is turning 60 this year, and I wanted to do something special for her. So, I made a reservation at a fancy restaurant that's usually booked years in advance. I've always wanted to try it. I expected to wait a long time, but luckily, there was a cancellation, and I got a reservation for my mom's birthday month. When I told her, she was thrilled. Seeing her so happy made it all worth it. Finally, the day of our reservation arrived. I drove my mom and daughter to the restaurant. I never thought we'd have any problems. "You're Miss Rebecca Miller who made a reservation, right? Please come this way," said the host. The grand entrance was perfect for a high-end restaurant. My mom and I were amazed by the fancy decor. Only my daughter was her usual cheerful self. Seeing her, both my mom and I smiled. My mom looked so happy, and I felt like this was going to be a great day. "Sorry for the wait. Here's your appetizer." The server placed a salad in front of us with careful precision. Just looking at the dish made my mom and me excited. They even had a special menu for my daughter, which I thought was a nice touch. While we were enjoying our meal, my mom glanced around the restaurant. "I recognize that person, and that one over there, the one from TV." "Yeah," I replied with a smile, helping my daughter with her food. Then I thought, and looked around like my mom. Sure enough, I recognized many faces and felt like I had joined this glamorous world. It seemed like everyone was smiling at the sight of my happy mom and daughter. Even though the restaurant had been nice about our reservation, I had been worried about bringing my young child. But the friendly looks from people around us made me feel at ease. The appetizers were done, and the first main course was brought out. The elegant and lavish presentation made me instinctively take out my phone to snap a photo. Immediately, a staff member approached me. He was different from the person who showed us to our table and had a very displeased look, which made me feel a bit taken aback. "Excuse me, can you please not take photos?" he said. "Oh, I'm sorry. This is what happens with poor folks. Why do we even have people like you in our establishment? Who let you in?" "Huh?" I clearly heard his muttered comment, and it made me feel quite uncomfortable. Trying not to let it show, I looked down, not wanting to dampen my mother's spirits. But as I wrestled with my feelings, my daughter's crying brought me back to reality. She had dropped the bread she was eating on the floor, and her cries echoed in the quiet restaurant. Other patrons started turning their attention to us, and in a panic, I tried to soothe her. But the more I rushed, the less effective I was. That's when the rude staff member approached again. "Ma'am, you're disturbing the other patrons with the noise." "I'm so sorry. I'll calm her down right away." "You shouldn't bring kids to places like this," he said, his sarcasm evident. This time, my mother clearly heard him. She frowned and spoke softly but firmly to the staff member. "Your attitude is what's really tarnishing the reputation of this place." However, her words backfired. The staff's attitude became even more hostile. "You do realize this isn't a place for children, right? I was just letting you know. If you keep making a scene, should I call security?" His arrogance and rudeness made both me and my mother furious, but we realized that getting angry would only play into his hands. Taking a deep breath, I tried to remain calm. Beside me, I could hear my mother doing the same. "I truly apologize for the disturbance. My daughter has stopped crying. Can you give us a moment?" I said, trying to diffuse the tension. The staff member stood with his arms crossed, staring at us, clearly waiting for our next move. "Could you please calm down? You're inconveniencing other guests," he retorted sharply. To distract my daughter, I'd offered her some bread from my plate. Thankfully, it worked. She stopped crying and happily started eating. I let out a sigh of relief and shared a glance with my mom, trying once more to apologize to the staff before taking my seat. But instead of easing the situation, the staff looked even more irritated and confronted us again. Do you even understand what I'm saying? I'm telling you to leave. This restaurant is too upscale for you, the staff member insisted, his tone dismissive. But my daughter has calmed down now, I replied, trying to reason with him. She might cry again, right? And each time she does, you'll be disturbing everyone. This is supposed to be a fine dining restaurant. You're ruining the experience for others. We haven't even received half of our meal. We've already paid in advance, and we informed the restaurant about my daughter when we made the reservation. There shouldn't be a problem, I explained, feeling increasingly frustrated. So what? This is exactly why people like you with low standards shouldn't come here. If you keep this up, I'm going to call the manager, he retorted sharply. With that, the disgruntled staff member hurried off to the staff room. My mother and I were left speechless, stunned by his rudeness. How could someone be so disrespectful? Didn't he realize that his attitude was what was truly lowering the restaurant's standards? Despite this being a special celebration for my mother's 60th birthday, my mood was completely ruined. While I had caused a bit of a scene, I knew I couldn't be too confrontational about it. As my mother and I pondered our next move, the earlier staff member returned, this time with a man who appeared to be the manager. When I saw his face, I couldn't help but gasp. It was Daniel Thompson, my middle school classmate. Is that you, Rebecca? Daniel asked, seeming to recognize me. The staff member looked surprised and asked Daniel, do you know her? Feeling a wave of relief, I remembered Daniel as someone who was earnest and cheerful back in school, though quite reserved. He usually hung out in small groups separate from mine, but I remembered him because he once admitted he liked me. At that time, I was already dating someone else, so I turned him down. Despite that, we talked a few times. I hoped Daniel would address the staff's behavior now. Oh, Rebecca was my classmate, Daniel explained. Then he turned to me and asked, are you sure you should be here? Confused, I replied, what do you mean? I heard the rumor, you know. You're a single mom now, right? People say single moms are usually broke. My restaurant is high-end. It'd be a problem if you said you couldn't pay later, Daniel said with a mocking smile, openly assessing me. His words hit me like a slap. I blinked in disbelief, remembering him as a kind person from our school days. It seemed he had changed a lot. How can you say that? I made a reservation and paid in advance, didn't I? I replied, trying to defend myself. You've always been headstrong, haven't you? Maybe that's why your husband got tired of you. You gotta know how to flatter sometimes, Daniel retorted. What does that have to do with anything? Why does it matter? I asked, feeling hurt and confused by his comments. Isn't that your compact car outside? He added sharply. What if it is? I replied with irritation, taken aback by Daniel's attitude. Daniel chuckled at my response. People who drive compact cars can leave. What? I was genuinely shocked by his statement. Didn't you notice when you parked? No one else here drives a compact car. Everyone's in Mercedes or something similar. Aren't you embarrassed to be so out of place? Daniel continued, looking at me with disdain. His words stung deeply. The Daniel I once knew, who had confessed his feelings for me, seemed to have vanished completely. He now sized us up with contempt. You look downright poor, not fitting for my restaurant. You understand the staff's position, so why don't you just leave? I was growing increasingly irritated by the way we were being treated, as if we were causing a scene and refusing to leave the restaurant. We had made a reservation and paid in advance, so we had every right to dine there. Judging us based on appearances was something I never expected from the Daniel I once knew. But after everything he said, there was no reason for my mom and me to stay. Even if the food was good, we didn't want to be in a place with disrespectful staff and a manager like Daniel. Daniel, you've changed. If this is how you're going to be, we're leaving, I stated firmly. Daniel seemed oddly satisfied with my decision. I'm living the dream. I'm definitely better off than you now. Don't think you can just casually call me by my first name. It's a shame you've changed, I replied sadly. Daniel smirked, clearly still holding on to old grudges. That's because you rejected me, making fun of me even though you're not that pretty. Well, at least I'm happier now. Isn't it refreshing? He chuckled and high-fived a staff member nearby, both sharing a laugh. It became clear to me that Daniel's terrible attitude stemmed from being rejected years ago. Say whatever you want. I'm certainly happier than someone who holds onto grudges for so long. I have a wonderful daughter and a kind mother. Let's go, Mom, I retorted confidently. My comeback seemed to amuse Daniel even more, as if he saw me as a sore loser. It frustrated me deeply, but I knew arguing with him now would be pointless. I never expected a former classmate to change so drastically. This day was meant to be a happy celebration. With these thoughts, I picked up my daughter and glanced at my mom. She, too, looked furious as she abruptly stood up. You've mocked my daughter enough. We don't want anything to do with a place like this. As you said, we're leaving. Right, everyone. My mom's declaration rang out loudly, echoing throughout the restaurant. Neither Daniel nor I knew who she was addressing. Then, to our surprise, all the diners who had been enjoying their meals began to stand up and get ready to leave. I was utterly stunned, trying to grasp what was happening. Wait, everyone, what's going on? I apologize for the disturbance. We'll handle these rude individuals right away. Just give us a moment, Daniel exclaimed, trying desperately to stop the diners from leaving. But he was met with cold stares from every direction. Daniel looked visibly flustered, clearly not understanding the sudden turn of events. Two elderly men stepped forward, shouting, "How dare you treat Mrs. Miller like that? We've been coming here for years, but we won't be back." Daniel was left speechless as the reality of the situation sank in. Shouted at, Daniel looked around the restaurant with a fearful expression. Following the lead of the two elderly men, all the other diners started scolding Daniel. They expressed their gratitude towards my mother, thanking her for something I couldn't quite understand. Holding my daughter, I watched in astonishment from the sidelines. The people scolding Daniel were all well-known celebrities, politicians, and clearly wealthy individuals. I was baffled as to why they held my mother in such high regard. Wait, what's going on here? What happened? I asked, trying to make sense of the sudden turn of events. Daniel's face turned pale as he desperately tried to calm everyone down. The staff member next to him looked equally panicked. I glanced over at my mom, silently seeking an explanation. That's when she revealed a shocking truth. All these people used to be regular customers of mine when I was a traditional sweets maker, she explained calmly. What? I exclaimed, completely taken aback. I knew my mom had made sweets, but I had no idea she catered to such prestigious clientele. One of the celebrities standing nearby chimed in, confirming my mom's statement. Mrs. Miller's sweets were the best in the country, he praised warmly. My mom listened to these words with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. I may not be a professional craftsman anymore, but thanks to them, I certainly honed my skills. I'm truly grateful. In that sense, the customer is truly a god, my mother stated with a profound sense of gratitude. Her words resonated deeply with me. Daniel looked visibly shocked, his posture tense and his breath held. As my mom approached him, she spoke calmly yet firmly. You too should cherish your customers. This restaurant means a lot to you, doesn't it? Daniel's response was defensive and defiant. Hey, cut it out. What's with this customer is God stuff? That's an outdated way of thinking these days. His outburst echoed through the restaurant, almost sounding like a cry of distress. But my mom remained composed, unfazed by his reaction. Do you really think that caring for customers is just a passing trend? She asked, her voice steady and unwavering. Hearing my mother's firm stance, Daniel struggled to find words. He appeared somewhat intimidated, yet he remained defiant and refused to accept her viewpoint. We are the ones providing the food. We're more important than the customers. This is absurd. I am important. If your daughter Rebecca hadn't rejected me. Daniel paused, then continued with an arrogant proposition. Apologize to me right now, and maybe I'll even consider making Rebecca my woman. It could be your way out of your struggling life. How does that sound? He looked at me with a smirk. His words disgusted me deeply, and I sighed heavily. I'm sorry, but honestly, I can't deal with you right now, I replied firmly, lowering my head in disappointment. Laughter rippled through the crowd around us, and Daniel's face flushed red with embarrassment. Despite thinking my response was clear, Daniel, with his misplaced confidence, seemed utterly unprepared for another rejection. Why not? I have money, you know. You don't want to be looked down upon, right? And isn't it embarrassing to be a single mother? Women like you probably can't remarry, so I'm offering to take you. Daniel persisted, his tone condescending. It's none of your business. Just because you have money doesn't guarantee happiness, my mom replied firmly, brushing him off. Daniel's face reddened even more in response to her rejection. I couldn't help but wonder if money was the reason behind Daniel's drastic change. They say money can corrupt, and witnessing it firsthand was eye-opening for me. How dare a single mother let you talk back to me? Daniel retorted, his frustration evident. At this point, I found Daniel's words increasingly irrelevant and pitiful compared to my mother's dignified response. Then, a booming voice interrupted from the back of the restaurant, startling all of us. We turned to see a middle-aged man entering the scene. Daniel's unease was palpable. "Daniel, what on earth are you doing?" the man demanded sternly. "Why is Dad here?" Daniel muttered, clearly caught off guard and uncomfortable with his father's sudden appearance. "I heard Mrs. Miller and her family were dining here, so I wanted to greet them. What's with all this commotion?" The man who had appeared was Daniel's father. I hadn't seen him since middle school, but he seemed stern and dignified. Earlier, one of the staff had mentioned the boss, so this man must be the owner of the restaurant. "I appointed you as manager after hearing you lost your job, but the business is only declining." "Now I see why," Daniel's father said disapprovingly. "What, you saw?" Daniel stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Yes, I arrived earlier. I peeked in when I heard the commotion, and there you were insulting Mrs. Miller's family. With all the arrogant things you were saying, do you even realize how wonderful a person Mrs. Miller is?" Daniel's father interrogated him sternly, and Daniel was visibly sweating. "What? This old hag is supposed to be someone special?" Daniel retorted, his disrespectful tone clear. "Watch your mouth. Mrs. Miller helped fund the opening of this restaurant," Daniel's father reprimanded sharply. "Ha! This old lady has that kind of money?" Daniel muttered, surprised and somewhat incredulous. Of course, Mrs. Miller's husband owned a famous traditional candy store, and Mrs. Miller herself worked in the tough world of candy making. Even as a woman, she's experienced so much more in life than you. "I wish I could distill her wisdom and give you a taste," the owner said with evident frustration, then turned to address us directly. "I'm deeply sorry for the trouble my foolish son has caused. Come on, apologize." "Why should I? I'm the manager of this upscale restaurant. Didn't you trust my abilities enough to leave me in charge? This is my place. I make the rules," Daniel retorted stubbornly. "Enough of your arrogance. What have I done, entrusting someone like you with this responsibility? That's it. I'm so disappointed in you. You're never setting foot in this place again," the owner declared firmly. "What?" Daniel's mouth fell open in shock. He began to panic and tried to apologize to his father, but the owner's decision remained resolute. "You're apologizing to the wrong person. You should be apologizing to Mrs. Miller and her family," the owner concluded, leaving Daniel visibly shaken and regretful. "Please, I'm so sorry. I finally made it, and I don't want to lose it all over something like this," Daniel pleaded, his desperation evident. "And you're still going on about that, you unbelievable guy," the owner replied, shaking his head in disbelief. His shock was palpable, understandable given the situation. No parent wants to discover their child has behaved arrogantly and disrespectfully. If my daughter had acted similarly, I would have supported the same decision as the owners. We all looked at Daniel with cold stares. The owner then proceeded to explain how Daniel came to work at the upscale restaurant. It turned out Daniel had previously worked at a prestigious hotel but had fallen into gambling debts. Debt collectors caused disturbances at the hotel, leading to his dismissal. Feeling lost and desperate, Daniel had turned to his father, who worked at the upscale restaurant, and pleaded for a job. At that time, Daniel's father had been offered a promotion to become the CEO of the company, so he decided to pass the management of the upscale restaurant to his son while overseeing several other restaurants in the same chain. Initially, Daniel worked earnestly, and the owner trusted him. However, over time, sales at Daniel's restaurant began to decline significantly, leaving the owner perplexed about the cause. I've received complaints about Daniel's terrible attitude from the staff, but there was no concrete evidence, and I wanted to believe in him because he's my son. Today, the hope turned into certainty. "It's truly disappointing," the owner said, looking at Daniel with a heavy heart. Daniel appeared stunned, as if the realization had struck him like a bolt of lightning, and he started to apologize desperately. "Dad, please forgive me. I've been trying my best, haven't I? Rebecca, please speak to my dad for me," Daniel pleaded, turning to me for support. "What exactly should I say? We were classmates, remember? For old time's sake," I responded incredulously. "After how you acted. You're really something," You truly are the worst, I added, unable to hide my disappointment. Daniel's face fell further upon seeing my disdain. My mother and I were both shocked by his behavior and sighed in response. Following these events, Daniel lost his position as the manager of the upscale restaurant and was disowned by his father, leaving him homeless. It later came to light that Daniel had accrued new debts he had concealed. Despite earning a good salary, he had spent most of it on gambling and had mistreated his staff almost daily. Interestingly, he had shown favoritism towards one particular staff member who had often caused us trouble. This individual turned out to be Daniel's former college junior, whom Daniel had hired against better judgment. Due to the junior's problematic work attitude, he was also dismissed from the restaurant along with Daniel. Having lost everything, Daniel sank deeper into gambling to cope with his losses, struggling to repay his debts. It's clear he's not a good person. Despite Daniel's actions ruining my mother's 60th birthday celebration, we managed to salvage the day by gathering everyone from the restaurant and relocating to a hotel room for a party. Surprisingly, the hotel was owned by Daniel's father, who graciously allowed us to use the space as a gesture of apology. It turned into a memorable event where I made new friends and witnessed firsthand how beloved my mother is. Many of the guests had known her from her days as a traditional sweet maker, visiting her shop to buy sweets as gifts. Her enduring connections highlight her charm and kindness. Inspired by my mother's example, I aspire to become a role model for my daughter just as my mother has been for me.
Hey Grace, you need to understand what you've done. How can you be so careless as to leave your responsibilities as a wife and cause problems for William? You're a terrible wife. I'm going to teach you a lesson. Well, Mother, I have my reasons for leaving. That doesn't matter. We're moving to a new, nicer apartment. If you want to live with us, I can tell you where it is. I'm sure my mother-in-law doesn't know anything yet. Well, it's good for me that she doesn't know. No, thank you. My name is Grace. I'm 35 and work in an office. I've been married to my husband William for 5 years. He's 40, which is 5 years older than me. I used to date older men, but I liked William because he was generous and kind. Our relationship was good, so we got married. Our marriage was okay, but soon after, problems started to affect our once peaceful life. I lost my job, and then William got fired because the company he worked for was struggling because of the recession. I never expected William to lose his job since he worked for a big company. I thought we would be okay financially and that this would last for our whole lives. But it turns out, nothing in life is guaranteed. We fell into financial trouble. I was a stay-at-home wife, but I decided to start working again. I reached out to my old employer, and fortunately, they hired me because someone had just left to have a baby. It was a relief to have some extra income. If William could find a new job, we'd be okay. But it's tough for a middle-aged man to find work, so he had to take part-time jobs as a day laborer, earning around $700 a month. I wasn't making much either, so we were barely scraping by. Hey, the rent here is too high. Can we move to a cheaper place? We need to lower our fixed costs to make things easier. We used to have a good income and didn't worry about money, living comfortably in a nice apartment. But now, with our financial situation change, I thought it would be wise to move to a cheaper place. However, William strongly disagreed. No, we're not moving. Why not? If we move to a smaller apartment, my mom will ask questions. So what? Why don't you just tell her the truth? We're struggling because you're not working now. William got upset and raised his voice. Don't ever tell my mother I'm unemployed. With your salary and what I make, we can cover the rent. Let's just keep it that way. I was both shocked and confused. You care more about saving face and keeping our current apartment than about our marriage. Even if we can pay the rent, we're still struggling to get by. That's why I suggested moving to a cheaper place. We can't save any money. But William wouldn't budge, so I had to give up on that idea. Life continued to be tough. One day, William said something really frustrating to me. Hey, this is all we have for dinner tonight. We used to have a lot more food. Just because you're working now doesn't mean you can neglect your responsibilities at home. Don't be lazy about managing this. His comment made me angry, so I snapped back. We're barely making ends meet. I'm doing my best at home and at work. If you weren't so concerned about keeping up appearances and wanting to stay here, we could save on food expenses. Or maybe you could earn more money so everything would be fine. When I made those comments, William got really angry and said, What are you talking about? Don't ever say that to me again. Just wait and see. I'll get a job at a good company and earn more money than you. He was furious, but if it made him more determined, I thought I could handle it. I tried to convince myself that it was okay. But despite his determination, William couldn't find a new job. He had to keep working part-time as a day laborer. Even though he was motivated, he wasn't getting any job offers. He hadn't done any extra training or gotten new qualifications. He had just been doing part-time work. William faced rejection at every interview and grew frustrated with having to compete with younger candidates. Eventually, he gave up on job hunting, still believing he could earn more than I did. I was disappointed and had lost hope. It wasn't just William's situation that worried me. Earlier today, I got another phone call from my mother-in-law. Despite being at work, she called me more than 10 times before I could return the call during my lunch break. Her voice was high-pitched and frustrated from the start. Why didn't you answer the phone right away? I told you I'm at work, didn't I? Well, you called while I was working. My mother-in-law is very close to her husband. A year ago, she called me frequently, and I thought she must be lonely and needed support. But all she talked about was her duty to support her husband, and now that I've started working, she was furious and kept calling me while I was at work. Did you discuss this with William properly? You can't even return my calls. I'm sorry. It's hard for us to live with you now. I'm not asking for your opinion. William won't object to it. No, William says it's too hard right now. Plus, we're having financial problems. Financial problems? William works for a big company. He must be making a lot of money. You should be rich, right? I'm always at a loss when she says things like that. William has been very clear that I shouldn't tell his mother the truth, so I can't explain our real situation. Instead, my mother-in-law thinks I'm selfish for working and doesn't believe how tough things are for us. Her calls are annoying, both when I'm at work and when I'm home at night. She believes that as a wife, my main job is to support my husband, which includes taking care of his mother. You haven't come to visit me lately. What's going on? I have a full-time job and I'm exhausted. William works part-time on weekends, so our schedules don't match. I'm sorry. We're both so busy that it's hard to find time. Your schedule? William is off on weekends. You could come then, right? My mother-in-law seemed very frustrated and continued to complain. I felt like it was time to finally tell her the truth about William's situation. No, William works on weekends. What do you mean? Just as I was about to tell her the truth, William, who had been lounging on the sofa watching TV, rushed over and grabbed my phone. Mom, I'm sorry I haven't visited you lately. I'm working on a big project and have to work on weekends too. I'll come see you soon. After he finished speaking, he hung up the phone and came back to me. What were you doing? Were you trying to tell my mom the truth? Just tell her the truth. If you keep hiding it, she'll keep saying things because she doesn't know what's really going on. I'm sorry to hear that, but don't tell my mom. That's enough. Just keep your pride and tell her the truth. Shut up. I'm the one keeping us afloat, so you should be grateful instead of arguing. With that, he went back to his room. I was at my breaking point. I couldn't solve our financial issues, and both my husband and his mother were cornering me. It was too much. William complained that his day job was too demanding and didn't do any housework, but his job wasn't even full-time. He worked on weekends and one day during the week. The rest of the time, he was home. I was sure he could find ways to earn more money or at least help with housework. Why do you do nothing at home and expect me to handle all the chores and work? Fed up with William's complaints, I decided to leave home for a while. I went back to my parents' place for a week to show William how tough managing the house really was. I told my parents everything that had been happening, and they suggested I should get a divorce as soon as possible. But we were in love, had been married for 5 years, and I didn't want to end it just like that. If I was going to get a divorce, I wanted to make sure I tried everything to fix things first. If that didn't work, then I'd consider a divorce. While I was at my parents' house, William called me. When are you coming home? Where's my mail? I won't be home for a while, so you'll have to handle all the housework while I'm gone. Don't be ridiculous. Just come home and take care of the chores. No, I won't. You know how hard housework is. You can clean the house, do the laundry, and cook, do everything yourself. It's important for you to understand how tough it is for me to manage all the housework while working. I made it clear I wasn't coming back, and I ignored William's repeated calls. Staying at my parents' place was very comfortable. For the first time in a long time, I could share the housework with my parents. My mother would say, "You must be tired," and she made many home-cooked meals. I really appreciated not having to do anything and getting food served to me. After spending about a week there, I thought I might want to stay a bit longer. But my parents' house was quite far from my office, taking an hour and a half each way to commute, so it wasn't practical. I thought it was time for William to understand how hard housework is, so I decided to come back home. I was worried the place might be a mess, but it was actually cleaner than I expected. Still, something seemed off. When I checked William's room, I noticed his clothes and suitcases were gone. I figured he must have gone to his mother's place, so I called him. "What are you calling me for now? Where are you?" "I'm at my parents' house." "You didn't go to your parents' house right after I left, did you?" "That's right. What's your point? It doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't have left in the first place. I'm already upset and not going back to that house." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to live with my mom. I'm moving into a new apartment." "I have no idea what you're talking about." I was speechless when the voice on the phone suddenly changed. "Hey, Grace. Do you realize what you've done? How can you abandon your duties as a wife and create problems for William? You're a terrible wife. I'm going to teach you a lesson." "Well, Mother, I have my reasons for leaving." "That doesn't matter. We're moving to a new, nicer apartment. If you want to join us, I'll tell you where it is." "I'm sure my mother-in-law doesn't know anything yet." "Well, it's good for me that she doesn't." No. Thank you." "What?" My immediate refusal shocked my mother-in-law. I was firm in my decision not to move. "Oh, are you serious? If William is going to live with me, then unless you come over here, you'll have to be on your own." "You can live alone, can't you? You've been relying on him." "Don't worry, I have enough to manage on my own. If we don't live together, then there's no reason for us to stay married. So I'm divorcing him." The mention of divorce seemed to shock both my mother-in-law and William. On the phone, my mother-in-law said, "Grace, there's no need to talk about divorce. I can't stay married to you anymore. I need to get rid of a terrible husband like you as soon as possible." When I said that, my mother-in-law reacted angrily. "How dare you speak about William like that? We don't want a life like yours either. So fine, William, just get a divorce." "No. I'll get the divorce papers ready. You'll regret this. It's too late for apologies." "Same to you." With that, the call ended. I figured my mother-in-law and William would soon show up with the divorce papers. I was relieved that things were turning out as I hoped. I was grateful that William wasn't willing to change and had gone back to his mother's place. This made it easier for me to decide to move on. If he wasn't going to improve, there was no reason for us to stay together. I packed my bags and waited for my mother-in-law to arrive. A few hours later, she showed up. "Oh, William isn't here. He doesn't need to be. Here you go. I had him fill out his part already. You need to complete yours as soon as possible." She handed me the divorce papers. I noticed that William's section had a shaky handwriting, as if he was reluctant. My mother-in-law ranted, "William is such a wonderful man. Despite having a terrible wife like you, he was hesitant about the divorce. I'll never forgive you for causing trouble for such a great person. I hope you live poorly and regret it." While I filled out my part of the form, my mother-in-law continued to yell at me. William's pride had prevented him from telling his mother the truth until the end. What a pathetic man he is. "What happened to your house? I saw that." "Well, if you want to come over, there's no place for you." "No, I won't." "How much did you sell it for?" "It was old, so it must have been cheap." "That's none of your business, but since I'm being nice, I'll tell you. It was about $50,000. It's not a huge amount, but enough for retirement. William will cover the cost of our new apartment." "Wow, I'm surprised you got approved." "What are you talking about? William is a high-class person. It was expected." "So you deposited the money into William's account." "How did you know that?" "That's not important. Stop asking." And that's just how a divorced woman talks. "So obviously you're still interested in him, but it's too late for that." "Don't worry. I've already agreed to the divorce." When I said that, my mother-in-law snapped and left. I was thrilled to be free from both her and William. I gathered the rest of my belongings and moved them back to my parents' house. I discovered a lot of things I collected for my small apartment. By leaving, I had managed to provoke my mother-in-law, which helped me escape the financial struggle. There was no way I'd hand over any of William's property. She would have to deal with it. Even now, I find it amusing to remember William's pale face during the property division discussion. Then, about 2 years later, I got a call from a number I recognized. I thought it might be work-related and picked up the phone, only to find it was my ex-mother-in-law. Oh my God, Grace, please help me. Mother, don't call me that. We're strangers now. Don't say that. I'm in trouble. Huh? Can't pay the rent and running out of savings. Yes. He didn't tell you about the financial problems until things were really bad, did he? Oh, you knew. I suspected he didn't want to tell you, but every time I tried, William told me not to. I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry, Grace. I didn't know anything. Please come back. I don't want to. He wouldn't change no matter how much I tried. Even you were always bullying me. I don't want to be around people like you ever again. Please don't say that. I don't have anything to eat anymore. I'm really struggling. According to my ex-mother-in-law, William had been trying to keep up appearances and didn't tell her about the financial issues. He used the $50,000 from selling the family home to pay rent, but his mother became suspicious if he didn't spend money on expensive groceries and fancy meals now and then. As a result, he quickly burned through that money and is now broke. Well, he got what he deserved, didn't he? Why don't you put aside your pride and live modestly in a cheap apartment? No, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to live comfortably with my elite son. My ex-mother-in-law cried as she spoke, but I quietly ended the call and blocked all her numbers. I also filed a restraining order against her just in case I needed to involve the police. They always seem to rely on others, whether it's parents or children. I've learned a lot from this experience and am determined to live independently. I've refocused on my own life and am working to move forward. The truth is clear. William continued living beyond his means, and my mother-in-law blamed only me without questioning her own son. I'm relieved to have cut ties with such a difficult mother and son. I'm confident that I can now live an independent life and hopefully meet a wonderful person in the future. I wish for happiness and success moving forward. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one. When my husband found out that I couldn't inherit my father's money, he started yelling. What? You can't get any of his money? If that's the case, I don't want to be with you anymore. I want a divorce right now. After that, I got back at my husband and my sister, who married each other right away. My name is Chloe. I'm a 32-year-old office worker, and I've been married to my husband George for 2 years. I met George through a relative, and we got married. My family had some money, but since we were the only daughters, my relatives worried about who would take over. They introduced me to George, saying it would be fine for him to join our family. My husband, George, didn't officially join our family, but he started living with me at my parents' home. My mother passed away a few years ago, so it was just my father, my husband, and me living in my parents' house. My husband was very kind and treated my father well, so he seemed like a really good person. However, a relative who introduced him to me told me something worrying right before our marriage. I know it's strange for me to say this since I was the one who introduced George to you, but he's kind of obsessed with money, so be careful. I had already married him and was about to have a wedding ceremony, so it was too late to do anything about it. But I hadn't noticed any signs that he was obsessed with money, so I went ahead with the marriage. Even after getting married, I kept a close eye on my husband because of what I had heard. But I didn't see any signs of money obsession from him. However, he seemed to be interested in my father's money and would casually ask about it when he was having a drink with my father. My father was open about it, so I didn't worry too much. Another thing my husband was curious about was my younger sister. She is 5 years younger than me, and unlike me, who is calm, she is lively and outgoing with a vibrant social life filled with men. She doesn't look like me, and my husband was surprised when he first saw her. Your sister has a completely different vibe from you, Chloe, doesn't she? Seeing my husband fascinated by my beautiful sister, with her striking looks contrasting my plain and boring appearance, gave me mixed feelings. However, the relative who introduced me to George was worried that if I, being modest and plain-looking, couldn't get married, there would be no one to inherit after my family. I thought there was no need to worry because I had a beautiful sister. But later, I understood why that relative was worried. My father was very lenient with my sister, letting her go to college after high school and even to a vocational school after she graduated from college. My sister didn't have a particular goal. She just didn't want to work. On the other hand, my mother was strict with her, insisting she should get a job right after college. But my father overruled my mother and let her go to vocational school. After graduating from vocational school, my sister got a job at a company owned by a friend of my father's. But she quit after just 6 months. I was shocked by her excuse for quitting. I couldn't show my full potential at that company. My mother and I were puzzled by how my sister spoke as if she had already mastered her job after only 6 months. But my father believed her and quickly arranged for her to work at a different company. After a while at the new job, our mother fell ill and had to be hospitalized. While our mother was in the hospital, my sister visited every day, often skipping work. Eventually, she quit that job too, claiming she needed to take care of our mother. However, her idea of caregiving mostly involved being in the same room as our mother, chatting or spending most of her time staring at her smartphone in the waiting room. After our mother passed away, I took on the responsibility of managing her affairs, including picking up her laundry from the hospital and ensuring she had fresh clothes. Meanwhile, my sister wasn't much help. Our mother may have enjoyed having her around to chat with, but as her health declined over a month, she couldn't even hold conversations anymore. Within 2 weeks of her condition worsening, she passed away. Both my father and sister were too shocked to arrange the funeral, so I took charge of that. Thankfully, our relatives pitched in, and we gave our mother a proper farewell. Following our mother's death, my sister moved out of our parents' house and started working part-time. However, her earnings weren't enough to cover her rent and utilities, so our father began footing those bills. It seemed she was spending her money on fun rather than saving. Whenever her part-time income fell short, she turned to our father for financial support. Our mother used to be strict with her, so even when she started working, our father didn't give her an allowance. Now, though, he provides her with whatever she needs. I realized that both my father and sister were content with their financial arrangement, so I didn't see any issue. Even after I got married and moved in with my husband at my parents' place, my father continued giving my sister an allowance. At that time, I didn't notice, but it turns out my sister was also asking my husband for money, and he was giving it to her willingly. He couldn't refuse her and told her to keep it a secret from me, saying, "Don't tell Chloe about this, okay? She might get jealous." My sister lived off this allowance from our father and the money from my husband, doing part-time work when she felt like it. However, this lifestyle couldn't last because our father fell ill and had to be hospitalized. While I juggled visits to the hospital between work and caring for our father, my sister never showed up. Instead, she started calling me and demanding money. "Since I've been getting money from Dad every month, I need you to continue that. The rent and utility bills are all being paid from Dad's account anyway," she said angrily, revealing this information for the first time. I was furious with my sister. Instead of worrying about our hospitalized father, she was only concerned about her own finances. Despite wanting to hang up, I knew my sister was also in a tough spot, so I asked her how much money our father was giving her each month. "How much does Dad give you each month? You really need to find a job soon and start supporting yourself." In a grumpy tone, my sister replied, "Stop nagging me. I was getting $1,000 every month, not including rent." I was taken aback by my sister proudly stating the amount. It made me worry that with such a substantial monthly allowance, she might lose any motivation to work seriously. I assumed our father would recover soon after his hospitalization, so I didn't see it as a major issue to keep supporting my sister financially. However, our father's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse, and I urgently reached out to our relatives. The doctor also informed me of his critical condition, leaving me deeply shocked. I desperately needed support from my husband during this tough time, but he claimed to be busy with work and rarely visited the hospital. When he did come, he'd ask insensitive questions like, "Your father must have a huge inheritance, right? Since you and your sister are the only heirs, you'll split it evenly, won't you?" I was speechless in response to my husband's focus solely on the inheritance. It dawned on me that this was what my relatives meant when they warned me about his obsession with money. I felt a deep sense of disappointment. Even when I called my sister to tell her about our father's critical condition, she only cared about her own financial needs. "Forget about that. Just make sure you keep sending me money every month," I can't survive without it." The call ended abruptly. I was furious at my sister's selfish words, but I also felt uneasy hearing a faint male voice in the background that I recognized all too well. It gave me a sinking feeling. About a month later, our father passed away, but neither my sister nor my husband was present in his final moments. Having gone through my mother's funeral, I understood the weight of organizing such an event. To add to the burden, neither my husband nor my sister offered any help. My sister didn't even attend the funeral. My husband did show up, but as soon as it ended, he disappeared, citing work. Even the relative who introduced us noticed his absence and questioned me about it. "What's going on with your husband? It's odd for him to be missing like this, isn't it?" All I could manage was a bitter smile in response. "He seems tied up with work. He had to head back home," I explained to the relative, who sighed in response. Yet it was I who wanted to sigh just as much. After the whirlwind of my father's funeral settled, my husband approached me with a smirk on his face. "Finally done, huh? So how much did you inherit? Even if it's split between the two of you, it's gotta be a tidy sum, right?" As warned by my relative before our marriage, it seemed my husband's mind was preoccupied with thoughts of my father's inheritance. Disheartened by his attitude, I replied casually, "My sister gets $100 million and I get nothing." I hadn't even spoken to my lawyer yet, and with the funeral just behind me, I hadn't sorted out my own emotions. Seeing my husband so eagerly discussing the inheritance made me feel like laughing out loud in disbelief. Without missing a beat, my husband erupted. "What? You can't inherit any of his assets? In that case, I have no reason to stay with you. Let's get a divorce right away." Feeling similarly, I shot back, "Fine, let's do it. You married me for my father's inheritance in the first place, didn't you? I'll divorce you." As I said this, I handed him the divorce papers I had already prepared. He seemed a bit taken aback as I brought them out, almost as if he expected it, but he signed them nonetheless. Just before leaving, he uttered these words as my now ex-husband. "I'll divorce you since you have no inheritance and marry your sister Emily to get the $100 million. Despite that, I promptly filed the divorce papers, severing ties with my deceitful husband. The next day, it seemed he had already submitted a marriage certificate with my sister. A few days later, I received a call from him. Still believing his delusion, he shouted, "When are we starting the inheritance process? Get Emily her $100 million as soon as possible." I had been expecting his call. I didn't want to be the one reaching out to him, as he had left our home on his own. I responded in a composed, business-like tone. "Let's discuss it at my place this Sunday. I'll be prepared for the proceedings." My ex-husband, believing he was about to cash in on an inheritance, hung up the phone with joy. Little did he know, I eagerly anticipated his reaction when he learned the truth. When the weekend arrived, both he and my sister came to my parents' house, surprised to find a lawyer waiting there. Nevertheless, my ex-husband seemed confident. "Of course you need a lawyer when there's an inheritance involved," he remarked. Then, with a puzzled expression, the lawyer addressed my ex-husband. "Before we discuss the inheritance, there's the matter of property division that your ex-wife has brought against you." The lawyer proceeded to show my ex-husband a series of photos, images capturing him leaving my sister's house on specific dates clearly marked. Addressing him firmly, the lawyer continued, "These photos serve as evidence of your affair prior to the finalization of the divorce. You will need to comply with the terms of the property division settlement." I had overheard my ex-husband discussing the inheritance on the phone with my sister, prompting me to instruct my lawyer to investigate his infidelity. Perhaps thinking I was preoccupied with my father's funeral, my ex-husband and sister had been meeting almost daily at her house, providing ample evidence for my case. Both were taken aback when the conversation shifted from inheritance to their affair. But my ex-husband quickly composed himself and countered, "Property division is nothing compared to the $100 million inheritance. I'll settle it immediately." As the lawyer presented the documents, my ex-husband, still speaking with arrogance, signed them without hesitation. Once confirmed, I calmly informed him, "Enjoy your life with my sister, who gets nothing from inheritance. Since you've signed, I'll ensure the property division is enforced." Upon hearing she inherited nothing, my sister exclaimed, "What? Why do I get nothing? I'm supposed to receive $100 million. My ex-husband also turned red and shouted, "There's no way there's no inheritance. I won't let you take it all."
The lawyer intervened calmly, addressing their anger. Emily is actually the biological child of Chloe's late mother from a previous relationship and was never formally adopted by Chloe's late father. Therefore, Emily, you cannot inherit your father's estate. I also explained to my bewildered sister, when our parents remarried, Emily, you were about 1 year old. You probably don't remember, but I recall it vividly. I was 6 years old at the time and was thrilled to suddenly have a sister. Never did I imagine that this same sister would end up taking my husband. Our parents, both burdened with young children from previous marriages, aimed to strike a balance between us when they remarried and began parenting together. My mother loved me as her own daughter, and my father cherished you, Emily. Perhaps he spoiled you more because you weren't his biological child, being overly cautious. Despite both of them remarrying with children, my mother, suspected by some relatives of being interested in my father's assets, chose not to officially adopt you. Those relatives who consistently recommended suitors for me did so knowing I was the sole heir to our father's wealth. If our parents had had a child together, things might have been even more complex. But fortunately or unfortunately, they didn't. Perhaps they avoided having more children to prevent future inheritance disputes. Now understanding that my father had been financially supporting my sister even into her adulthood because he couldn't leave her his inheritance, I realized the extent of their relationship. Like my sister, I also hadn't been formally adopted by my mother, but it never affected how we saw each other. It seemed our parents hadn't disclosed their remarriage to my sister, and today was the first time she learned the truth. As for my ex-husband, his face turned from red to pale as the situation sunk in. Not only was he not inheriting what he expected from my sister, but he was also facing a property division claim he had already signed off on. With a pale face, he asked me, was it a lie that my sister was getting $100 million and I was getting nothing? Suppressing a laugh, I replied, of course it was a lie. It was my way of getting back at you for cheating on me. Besides, my father's estate was nowhere near $100 million, even though he was wealthy. Suddenly, my usually quiet sister erupted. I've been shopping so much, thinking I'd inherit Dad's money. What about the support Dad was giving me until now? Will you take care of that, sis? You're married with a dependable husband now, so you don't need it anymore, right? Make George support you. She glanced at my pale ex-husband, but he shook his head. I can't do that. I also spent a lot, counting on the inheritance, and now with the property division, I'm stretched thin. With that, my ex-husband unexpectedly dropped to his knees before me, begging, Chloe, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. Please, can we reconcile? The lawyer, who had been packing up to leave, chuckled at the sight. Where had the arrogance he showed upon arrival gone? George, pleading on his knees like that, seemed utterly absurd. After our discussion, my ex-husband and sister left, and they divorced soon after. It seemed my ex-husband lost interest in my sister once he realized she wouldn't inherit anything. He mentioned property division, but since he had no assets, I arranged for him to pay from his monthly salary as advised by my lawyer, ensuring I received what was due. My sister, who lost our father's financial support, struggled to make ends meet with part-time work, but eventually faced overwhelming debts and declared bankruptcy. She moved out of her apartment, and I lost track of her whereabouts. My father's excessive support had made my sister dependent, hindering her ability to work seriously. Subsequently, my relatives began suggesting potential marriage partners for me as I lived alone in my parents' house. But I declined. I wanted to find a partner on my own terms, determined not to repeat the mistake of marrying someone like my ex-husband again. Don't come back here because my girlfriend and I are going to live in this house. On the day my 3-year-old daughter was finally allowed to come home from the hospital after being there for a month, I returned to find my husband living with another woman. I was shocked by his betrayal. Both he and his girlfriend laughed at me, mocking me. To make things worse, my husband had the nerve to call me back to clean up the house, essentially kicking me out. Furious, I talked to some people and made sure my husband and his girlfriend faced consequences for their actions. My name is Emily. I met my husband Michael through my sister's husband, and we lived together with our 3-year-old daughter. We built our house while I was pregnant. We chose everything together, keeping it white inside and out, which I really liked. However, white gets dirty easily, so it needs a lot of cleaning. My husband gets very upset if there is even a small stain. He gets angry when our daughter spills food or dirties the walls. But he never helps clean up.
He just complains that the house is dirty. He always points out the tiniest details, and lately I've been getting really fed up with it. Initially, I quit my job and became a full-time housewife after we got married. But when our daughter started kindergarten, I decided to work part-time to save money for the future. Since I started working, I hoped my husband would help more with housework and childcare. However, he thinks that my part-time job is my own choice. So he continues to leave all the household and childcare duties to me, just like before. One day, after sending our daughter to kindergarten, my sister and her husband, who live nearby, were supposed to visit our house. I tried to tidy up as much as possible while helping my daughter get ready in the morning. My husband got annoyed that our daughter was touching things with her messy hands and called me before he left for work, complaining that I wasn't disciplining her properly. Even though he used to adore her when she was born, lately he looks at her as if she is something dirty. I try not to show my feelings in front of our daughter, but his attitude has been really upsetting me. Because my husband complained, I was running late to take my daughter to kindergarten and rushed to get back home to meet my sister and her husband. They had decided to visit just 2 days earlier when they called to see if I had time to meet. I thought they must have something important to talk about, but when I saw them at the front door, I realized it might not be good news. I invited my sister and her husband into the living room, and although they complimented our always clean house, their expressions remained serious. After I served them coffee, my sister's husband finally gathered the courage to speak. Actually, I've heard some not-so-good rumors about Michael. What he said next was unbelievable. Apparently, my husband was having an affair with a coworker. My husband was originally introduced to me by my sister's husband, but they weren't directly acquainted. It was through a mutual friend of theirs, my husband's brother. In other words, my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law's friend works at the same company as my husband, and he had heard some bad rumors from a colleague. One of the colleagues said that a female coworker had been going around saying she has a boyfriend in the company, and it seemed like she was talking about my husband. Just as my brother-in-law's friend was trying to discreetly find out if the rumors were true, he accidentally stumbled upon my husband and the woman together. They weren't even trying to hide it, openly flirting at the company. His friend was shocked, took a photo of them, and reported it to my brother-in-law. Then my brother-in-law told my sister's husband and showed him the photo. Even though my sister's husband initially couldn't believe it, he had to accept the truth when he saw the photo evidence. He had the photos with him, but I chose not to look at them. My sister and her husband apologized, feeling sorry for introducing me to a man who would cheat. Finding out about my husband's affair left me unsure of what to do. I had never doubted him before my sister's husband shared his story. Most of all, I didn't want to take my daughter's father away from her. But I also couldn't bear the idea of being betrayed. Just as I was about to discuss next steps with my sister and her husband, my phone rang. It was the kindergarten, informing me that my daughter had a high fever and needed to be picked up. It looks like my daughter is sick with a fever, so I needed to go pick her up. When I mentioned this, my sister and her husband, who had come by car, offered to come with me to get my daughter. The three of us went together to pick her up from kindergarten. When we got to the kindergarten, my daughter looked exhausted, and it was clear her illness was more serious than a common cold. Her cheeks appeared swollen, and her teacher mentioned that a classmate had MPS, raising concerns that my daughter might have it too. We hurried to the hospital and informed the reception about our suspicions regarding MPS, given her symptoms. They decided she needed immediate tests because there was a risk of complications. While waiting for the test results, I became anxious and tried calling my husband, but he didn't answer and didn't call me back. Soon after, we learned from the test results that my daughter had MPS and had developed meningitis. She was admitted to the hospital immediately and settled into a room. After getting an explanation about her hospitalization and seeing that she was asleep, I decided to go home to prepare for her stay. My sister and her husband offered to stay with her, so I called a taxi and headed home. Late at night, my husband finally returned my call. He sounded annoyed that I had called him while he was at work and said sharply, "Don't call me during work." I explained our daughter's condition, her fever, hospitalization, and meningitis diagnosis, but he didn't seem to grasp how serious it was. He responded dismissively, "You're with her at the hospital, so don't bother me with every little thing. I'll stay there for a while to be with her." "All right, I'll leave it to you," he said, and then abruptly hung up without expressing any concern for our daughter. As a result, my daughter stayed in the hospital for over a month. During that time, my sister, her husband, my parents, and even my in-laws visited us frequently, worried about her. Surprisingly, my husband never visited once. When it was time for my daughter to be discharged, I asked my husband to pick us up, but he refused, claiming he was too busy with work. I shared this with my sister, and she and her husband offered to drive us home instead. On the day of my daughter's discharge, my sister's husband drove us home. It was a relief to see my daughter back to her normal self after such a long ordeal. However, when we arrived home, I noticed my husband's car in the parking lot, even though he was supposed to be at work. Through the window, I could see the silhouette of a woman inside. My sister and her husband also saw it and were furious, convinced it was his affair partner. I stopped them from barging in, left my sleeping daughter with them in the car, and went inside alone. When I entered the living room, I saw a woman standing close to my husband, just as I had seen from outside the window. When my husband noticed me, he quickly moved away from her. But it was already too late. I had seen everything. "Hey, I'm back. Who's this?" I asked him. Instead of answering, my husband stepped in front of the woman as if to shield her from me. Ignoring my question, he demanded, "Why are you here?" I couldn't believe it. He had forgotten the day our daughter was supposed to come home from the hospital. "I told you today was the day she's getting out of the hospital," I insisted. "No way. You said it was tomorrow. You tricked me into coming back today." My husband's response made it clear he had been so focused on bringing his mistress home that he forgot about our daughter. The woman peeked around my husband, looked at me, and smirked. Then she remarked to him, "Is this your wife?" What a chubby old lady. Hearing that, my husband's attitude hardened as he declared, "Yeah, I've got a young and cute girlfriend now. We decided to live here together, so don't come back." He put his arm around his mistress, as if to emphasize their relationship. I recalled the moment my sister's husband had revealed the affair to me. Despite my initial hesitation about divorce, witnessing my husband's behavior during our daughter's hospitalization shattered any remaining love I have for him. He hadn't visited our daughter even once in the hospital, leaving me to handle everything alone while he took advantage of my absence to spend time with his mistress in our home. I had taken time off from my part-time job and was exhausted from running between the hospital and home. Instead of supporting me during this difficult time, he was flaunting his new relationship and demanding I stay away from our own house. I was forced to clean up after my husband and his mistress, who had the audacity to tell me not to come back home. Exhausted and unable to argue any longer, I quickly packed my things and returned to the car where my sister and her husband were waiting. As I left, my husband and his mistress laughed at me. In the car, I shared what had happened with my sister and her husband. They were ready to confront my husband, but I stopped them. I didn't want my daughter to witness a scene like that, so I asked them to take us to my parents' house instead. We found a warm welcome there, and my daughter gradually improved while staying with my parents. From the time our daughter started crawling, my husband seemed only concerned about cleanliness and rarely interacted with her. His affection for her was fleeting, and she likely doesn't have many memories of him being loving or attentive. She never expressed a desire to see her father or mentioned feeling lonely. I didn't have the energy to confront my husband when I left our house, but I couldn't let things continue like this. Now that my daughter was recovering and could possibly return to kindergarten, I started to consider what to do about my husband. One day, I got a call from him. Curious about what he wanted to say, I answered. He bluntly told me, "The house is dirty. Come back and clean it." Even though he should have been living there with his affair partner, it seemed like neither of them did any housework. My sister had mentioned she was young and likely hadn't lived on her own before, leaving household chores to her family. It was absurd for my husband, who had told me not to return, to now demand that I come back just to clean. His request struck me as incredibly selfish. I declined his request in disbelief. "You should clean your own house, or maybe that girl you're having an affair with can do it," I retorted, hanging up the phone. Despite my husband's persistent calls afterward, I ignored them all. I could only imagine his frustration on the other end, unsure of what would happen next. Later that night, after putting my daughter to bed with the help of my parents, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard a commotion at the front door. Curious, I went to investigate. As I opened the door, I was shocked to see my husband and his affair partner standing there, completely soaked in red. Behind them, my sister and her husband, along with my in-laws, stood with stern expressions, ensuring they couldn't escape. My husband and his affair partner apologized, saying, "We are truly sorry." However, my sister, her husband, and my in-laws didn't accept their apology. What covered them from head to toe was not blood but tomato juice. After my husband had called me to clean the house, I immediately informed my sister, her husband, and my in-laws about it. My sister and her husband visited my husband first, while my in-laws, who lived nearby, drove over to his place. My sister and her husband tricked my husband into going to the garden, pretending they needed some gardening tools I owned. When he turned his back, they pelted him with tomatoes. Startled, he turned around, only to have more tomatoes thrown at his face. These tomatoes were overripe and very soft, sourced as waste from a farm owned by a relative of my sister's husband. They wouldn't have caused much physical pain upon impact, but their squishy insides splattered easily, which clearly affected my husband, who prized cleanliness. My sister and her husband didn't give him a chance to react and continued throwing tomatoes. The tomatoes not only hit my husband but also splattered against the pristine white walls of the house, causing chaos. As this unfolded, my in-laws arrived on the scene. My husband was now being bombarded with tomatoes by my sister, her husband, and my in-laws. Amidst his panic screams and flailing, his affair partner, curious about the commotion, appeared in the garden. Without hesitation, she too became a target for the tomatoes. Attempting to flee back inside, she was forcefully pulled back out by my sister and ended up running alongside my husband in the garden. I overheard everything while on the phone from the moment my sister and her husband showed up at my husband's place. Every time the walls outside got dirty, my husband would scream sadly, and his affair partner would join in crying and panicking. Eventually, my sister, her husband, and my in-laws threw all the tomatoes they had brought. By then, the two of them had calmed down completely. They were then walked to my parents' house nearby. Even though I can never forgive what my husband and his lover did, hearing my husband's pitiful voice and the lover's cries made me feel a bit better. It was almost funny to see them both so desperate, apologizing to me. My sister's husband came up with this plan. After my daughter left the hospital, I began to doubt my husband's behavior during her stay. I decided to set up the baby monitor we used when she was little in our bedroom. I suspected that if my sister's husband was right, my husband might have been bringing his lover to our house while our daughter and I were away. I was anxious that the hidden baby monitor, concealed near a houseplant, would be discovered at any moment. Fortunately, neither my husband nor his lover found it, and it captured everything they did. Since the day my daughter was in the hospital, it seemed like my husband was living with his lover at our house part-time. Each time I returned home, I saved the recorded footage as proof. After my daughter left the hospital and I confirmed my husband's affair, I confided in my sister and her husband about the video evidence and sought their advice on what to do next. They suggested involving my in-laws first. My in-laws live about a 30-minute drive away and are usually calm people, unlike my husband who often gets angry. So with my sister and her husband, I took the evidence to my in-laws' house. At first, they found it hard to believe that their son could cheat. However, when we showed them the footage, they saw undeniable proof of my husband being intimate with his lover. They had no choice but to believe me. What's worse, my husband was heard saying hurtful things about our daughter, like how she just makes a mess and isn't cute at all, and that he wanted to throw both her and me out. This revelation made my in-laws furious. They wanted to confront my husband immediately. But my sister, her husband, and I convinced them to hold off for the moment. When my husband found out I knew about the affair, he became defiant. We didn't want to give in to his wishes for a quick divorce, so we discussed with my in-laws how to come up with a fitting punishment. Seeing the evidence on the video, my in-laws were also deeply hurt and immediately agreed to our plan. After brainstorming together, we decided on a unique punishment, throwing tomatoes at him. This idea came from my sister's husband, who had studied in Spain and was inspired by the tomato festival there. We thought it would be satisfying because my husband really dislikes getting dirty, and throwing tomatoes wouldn't cause any harm. It was also convenient timing since my sister's husband's relatives, who are farmers, had an excess of tomatoes that were going to be discarded. Initially, I was taken aback by the unusual idea, but I soon realized that simply throwing tomatoes wouldn't suffice. I felt my husband deserved to experience some discomfort from being hit by tomatoes, so I agreed to the plan. My sister, her husband, and my in-laws were all set to carry it out. I wanted to join in throwing tomatoes at my husband as well, but I was still concerned about my daughter's well-being and couldn't leave my parents' house. Additionally, my sister and her husband felt guilty for introducing me to my husband, and my in-laws felt responsible for how they raised their son. So it was decided that the four of them would proceed with the plan without me. I made sure they promised to do it outside the house, not inside. Despite my disappointment at not being able to throw tomatoes myself, witnessing my husband and his lover in such a pitiful state, thanks to my family, was oddly satisfying. I had already informed my parents about my husband's affair, so when they were brought to my parents' house, they were visibly uneasy. I threw the divorce papers at my husband without looking him in the eye and said firmly, "Let's get divorced. I have all the evidence of your affair. You'll also need to pay child support." Upon hearing the mention of child support, the lover reacted with disbelief. It seemed she had been imagining marrying my husband, becoming a housewife, and living comfortably. Realizing that child support payments could burden her financially, she began denying any involvement, claiming, "I have nothing to do with this man." That's when I mentioned the footage from the baby monitor. At this point, the lover argued that it was an invasion of privacy, and my husband backed her up, threatening legal action against me. However, my in-laws, along with my sister and her husband, scolded them harshly. Still shaken from the tomato incident, both of them fell silent quickly. When I reiterated to my husband that he needed to agree to the divorce, he reluctantly began to complain. "I've been supporting you all this time, and as a housewife, you should obey your husband. You can't even clean properly. You were a useless wife. It's only natural that I cheated on you," my husband sarcastically remarked, mocking the idea of a part-time working mother being able to support herself. However, there was a reason why I decided to return to my parents' house this time. It wasn't just because my parents and my sister and her husband welcomed me back, but also because I was offered a full-time position at my part-time job. When I informed my husband about this opportunity, he clicked his tongue in frustration. That's when I made it clear to him that my daughter and I would never return to that house again. Predictably, my husband started complaining about who would clean the walls of the house. But ultimately, it was his infidelity that caused all of this, and he was entirely at fault. When he demanded that I pay for cleaning the exterior, my in-laws had had enough. They disowned him right then and there for bringing up such trivial matters at this point. After being disowned by my in-laws, my husband unexpectedly proposed to his mistress. Covered in tomato and feeling humiliated, she had lost all affection for him, and the idea of paying child support added to her rejection. She bluntly told my husband, "I'm not interested in a man without money," leaving him stunned. Under our stern gazes, my husband reluctantly agreed to our divorce. We informed them that we would continue discussions through our lawyers, and then we sent my husband and his mistress away. I'm not sure what they discussed on their way back, but apparently, they ended up angrily arguing and parted ways, cursing each other out. Afterwards, my husband ended up living alone in our house, struggling to manage the mortgage and child support payments on his own. He tried seeking help from his brother, but was coldly turned away and cut off from his family. Now he had no one left to rely on. Meanwhile, the mistress faced repercussions from the rumors about her relationship with my husband. She ended up quitting her job, and when her affair was discovered by her parents, they disowned her just like my husband's family did to him. She was kicked out of her parents' home and now lives in a cheap, run-down apartment. During the day, she works part-time, and at night, she works in a nightclub to make ends meet. My sister once spotted the mistress working at a store's register and remarked how much weight she had lost and how aged she looked, despite being in her early 20s. It's heartbreaking to think about how a single mistake could dramatically alter someone's life and rob them of so many potential happy moments. As for me, I've started working full-time with the support of my parents, sister, and her husband, who welcomed me back to their home. It's challenging at times, but I'm beginning to feel a sense of achievement as I take on more responsibilities at work. My daughter has settled into living with my parents and is thriving each day. When we lived with my husband, she struggled to get along with adult men, likely due to his yelling. Now, she's gradually overcoming that thanks to the kindness shown by my sister's husband and my father. Surrounded by a caring family, my daughter and I are now enjoying a peaceful and happy life.
The day Richard threw the crumpled divorce papers at my feet is a day I'll never forget, like a scar that won't fade. I stood there, shocked and unable to move, as he said those chilling words. "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her. It's over, Anna." I was 34 then, taking care of our son Jason, who was only 13. Our life as I knew it fell apart in that moment. I didn't see it coming and I wasn't ready for what would happen next. Richard and I met when I was just 19. He was 26, working at a big company. I was a receptionist at a smaller part of the company. He noticed me and I liked the attention. I was young and he seemed perfect. Our relationship moved quickly. I got pregnant unexpectedly and soon we were married in a simple ceremony. Life seemed uncomplicated back then. I focused on our home and raising Jason. Richard was busy with work, and gradually he was around less. I didn't think much about it. I was busy with our son and our home. The day he left, everything fell apart. I had to face the truth about our supposedly happy life. Richard's cheating, his growing distance. The signs were there, but I chose to ignore them. With nowhere else to go, Jason and I moved back to my family home. My sister Laura and her husband weren't welcoming. They made it clear we were a burden, unwanted in their settled life. I felt lost, a high school graduate with little work experience suddenly needing a job to support us. The job market was tough, each rejection hurt. But I had Jason to care for, a young boy facing grown-up problems. In my desperation, I found a job at a call center. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in my dark days. The work was hard, long hours, upset customers, constant business. But it gave me purpose again, something I'd lost in all the turmoil. As I started working in the corporate world, I realized how sheltered I'd been. My lack of knowledge, especially about legal things like divorce and alimony, made me vulnerable to Richard's decisions. This realization sparked something inside me. I promised myself I'd never feel so powerless again. I threw myself into learning about the world outside home and family. Watching Jason grow up, I saw how our situation affected him. He became quieter, more serious than other kids his age, with eyes that seemed older than he was. But he was tough, adapting to our new life with a strength I admired. Our journey was just starting, a path full of challenges and discoveries. But through those challenges, I discovered a resilience I didn't know I had. And from those discoveries, I found a determination to stand up for ourselves and claim what we deserved. Life at my sister Laura's house reminded me every day of how much we had fallen. Her husband Mark didn't hide his dislike, often saying, "Anna, you need to find your own place soon. We can't keep supporting you forever." The pressure was constant. I looked through job listings every day, and every rejection made me feel worse. But Jason's quiet strength kept me going. Despite everything, he stayed focused on his studies, never giving up. One day I found a job opening at a customer service center. It wasn't fancy, but it was a chance. The interview was nerve-wracking. Sitting there in my old suit with a sparse resume, I felt out of place. "Why are you interested in this job?" the interviewer asked. I wanted to say I have no other option, but instead, I forced a smile and replied, "I'm seeking a chance to learn and develop." To my surprise, they offered me the job. It was a contract role, but it was a beginning. When I told Laura and Mark, I felt a mix of relief and a pang of inadequacy when Mark commented, "Finally, you can start pulling your weight." The job was tough, the fast pace, the constant calls. It was overwhelming, but I pushed through, motivated by Jason's needs and my determination to prove myself. As I settled into the routine, I couldn't stop thinking about my marriage with Richard. How did I miss the signs? The late nights, the mysterious disappearances, the hushed phone conversations. I ignored them, believing in a facade of happiness. But the truth was, Richard had a double life, and I was just a convenient cover. Realizing the truth was hard to accept. It sparked anger toward Richard for his betrayal and toward myself for being so trusting. But a conversation with a coworker changed everything. She, a single mother like me but more knowledgeable, said something that hit home. "Anna, did you receive any alimony or child support? You know you're entitled to it, right?" I was shocked. It hadn't even occurred to me. Richard had left us with nothing, and I had simply accepted it. That moment made me see how little I knew and how unprepared I was. Determined to set things right, I started educating myself. I read books, searched online, anything I could find about divorce and family law. The more I learned, the clearer it became how Richard had manipulated the situation. One day I got a call from Jason's school. He'd been in a fight. My heart sank as I hurried there, fearing the worst. But what I found wasn't a troubled kid, it was a young man pushed too far. "He called you a gold digger," Jason said, eyes blazing with anger. "He said you were after Dad's money. I couldn't let him say that about you." I was stunned. Our pain and shame had reached my son, poisoning his world. It was a wake-up call. I couldn't let Richard's betrayal define us anymore. That night, watching Jason sleep, I made a promise. I would fight back. I would reclaim what Richard took from us, not just for me, but for Jason too. It was time for Richard to face the consequences. The small apartment we moved into was a world away from our old home with Richard, but it was ours. The walls were empty, furniture basic, but it marked a fresh beginning. Jason adjusted quickly, surprising me with his resilience. He threw himself into school with a passion that impressed and worried me. "I want to do well, Mom, for us," Jason would say, his determination shining through his words. I'd been at the call center for a year now. The job was still tough, but I'd grown more confident, handling challenges better. It was a small sense of achievement, but it reminded me I wasn't just Richard's ex-wife. One evening at dinner, Jason looked up and asked, "Mom, do you ever think about Dad?" His question caught me off guard. We rarely talked about Richard. "Sometimes," I said, "but not the way you might think. I think about what he did to us, how he left us with nothing." Jason's eyes hardened. "I hate him for that. He thinks he can walk away without any consequences." His words struck a chord in me. His anger and sense of injustice resonated deeply with my own feelings. "You're right," I replied firmly. "He shouldn't get away with it." In the following weeks, I delved into research about divorce and family law. I learned about alimony, child support, and the legal options available. The more I understood, the more empowered I felt. Then, a breakthrough happened. I discovered that in cases of infidelity, the betrayed spouse could seek alimony even years after the divorce under certain circumstances. This revelation was eye-opening. Richard's cheating had left traces, the late-night calls, secretive behavior, it all pointed to his betrayal. Buoyed by this revelation, I sought out a lawyer. She was understanding, her eyes showing empathy beyond professional duty. "You have a case," she confirmed, "but it won't be easy. Are you prepared for this?" I nodded, my determination solid. "I'm ready, for myself and for Jason." The lawyer outlined our strategy. We would pursue alimony, highlighting Richard's infidelity and his failure to support us financially after the divorce. It would be a challenging process, but I was prepared. I had to be. Jason stood by me, his quiet strength a reassuring presence. "We'll get through this, Mom," he assured me. "We're in this together." On the day we filed the lawsuit, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anxiety, but most of all, a sense of justice. Richard had hurt us, and it was time for him to face the consequences. As the legal battle unfolded, I braced myself for the pushback. Richard wasn't going to accept this quietly, but I wasn't the naive woman he left behind. I had grown stronger, more knowledgeable, and I was prepared to fight. The legal battle against Richard opened a Pandora's box. The lawyer's investigation uncovered more than just infidelity. It exposed a web of lies and deceit that Richard had spun over the years. One afternoon in the lawyer's office, she handed us a file. "This is more than I expected," she said gravely. Richard wasn't just cheating, he was leading a double life. The documents painted a damning picture. Bank statements, credit card bills, and photos revealing Richard's secret life. He lived lavishly while neglecting his family. "Take a look at this," the lawyer pointed to a photo. It showed Richard, smiling and carefree with another woman, his arm around her. My heart sank at the sight, but I faced it head-on. This was the harsh truth. Jason's expression hardened as he examined the evidence. "How could he do this to us? To you?" His voice betrayed a mix of anger and disbelief. "We'll hold him accountable," I asserted firmly. "He won't escape this." The legal battle took its toll. Richard's lawyers were aggressive, trying to undermine me, portraying me as a bitter ex-wife. But I stood my ground, supported by Jason and our lawyer, bolstered by the evidence we had gathered. Then came the day of the deposition. Richard sat opposite us, looking confident. However, that confidence faded as our lawyer began presenting the evidence. "Mr. Richard, can you explain these expenses?" she asked, her tone sharp, sliding the bank statements across the table. Richard glanced at the documents, and I sensed a flicker of panic. "These are personal expenses. They're unrelated to my marriage." "And these photos," the lawyer continued, her gaze steady, "they tell a different story." Richard's facade began to crack. He stumbled for words, his composure slipping. "It was just a fling, nothing serious." Jason cut in, his voice cold. "You destroyed our family for a fling." The tension in the room was palpable. Richard's lawyer tried to intervene, but it was too late. The evidence was damning, Richard's excuses weak and unconvincing. Leaving the deposition, I felt a mix of satisfaction and vindication. Richard had been exposed as a cheater. But the legal battle wasn't over. Richard would surely fight back. Yet I was prepared. For the first time, I felt empowered. No longer a victim of Richard's betrayal, I was fighting back, for Jason and for the future we deserved. As the lawsuit dragged on, each hearing more contentious than the last, an unexpected twist emerged. One evening, Jason came home with an unusual expression. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today," he said, a mix of disbelief and amusement in his voice. "What happened?" I asked eagerly. "I had a job interview today at a pharmaceutical company. Guess who the HR manager is?" I felt a shiver down my spine. "Not Richard?" Jason nodded grimly. "Yes, Richard. He didn't recognize me at first. I guess he's forgotten his own son's face." The irony was bitter. Richard, who had abandoned his family for his career, was now unwittingly interviewing his own son. "What did you do?" I asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and concern. A cold determination flashed in Jason's eyes. I played along at first, but then he paused, a smirk appearing on his face. In the end, I couldn't resist. I asked him if the company condones affairs. The look on his face was unforgettable when he realized who I was. I felt torn between shock and a strange satisfaction. Richard, confronted by the son he had abandoned, in a place where he typically felt powerful. "What did he say?" I asked eagerly. "He denied it, of course," Jason replied, so I pressed on. I asked him how he could interview me after tearing our family apart for his own selfish reasons. Jason's voice held bitterness, but also a hint of triumph. He was speechless. I left him there, grappling with his guilt. The revelation hit me hard. Richard was finally facing the consequences of his actions in a way he never expected. It was a twist of fate that felt almost poetic. "But why did you go to that interview?" I asked, still trying to process it all. Jason's answer was simple yet profound. "I needed to confront him face to face, to show him that despite everything, he didn't break us. We're still standing, and we're fighting back." The aftermath of Jason's encounter with Richard at the job interview stirred waves in our ongoing legal battle. Richard, now confronted by his own son, grew more desperate in his defense. Our lawyer, Miss Carter, called us for a strategy meeting. "Richard's lawyers are pushing for a settlement," she informed us in her office, "but considering the evidence and Jason's testimony, I believe we can aim higher. What do you want to do?" I turned to Jason, wanting his input. His expression was resolute, his determination unwavering. "We press forward," he declared firmly. "He needs to face consequences, not just financially, but morally as well." Miss Carter nodded firmly. "Okay, let's get ready for the next meeting. It's going to be tough, but we have the truth on our side." The meeting turned out to be really hard. Richard's lawyer tried to make him seem sorry for his actions, but Miss Carter kept going, showing proof of how Richard had lied and not taken care of his family. Richard went up to speak, seeming both stubborn and fake sorry. "I'm sorry for hurting my family," he said, but his voice didn't sound like he meant it. "But I think the deal they're offering is fair." His words didn't feel true, and I got really mad. How could he act like he was the one who was hurt after everything he'd done? That's when Jason spoke out. "Fair and just?" he challenged, his voice strong yet filled with emotion. "Was it fair to leave your family behind, to lie and cheat, while we struggled to make ends meet?" The courtroom went quiet, Jason's words hanging heavily in the air. Richard glanced at his son, perhaps feeling a flicker of guilt, but it was too late for regrets. After thinking it over, the judge decided in our favor. The settlement was much more than what Richard had offered, a clear recognition of the harm he had caused. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a sense of justice. It wasn't just about the money, it was about holding Richard responsible for his actions. "We did it, Mom," Jason said, a small smile forming. "We finally made him face the consequences." The victory in court against Richard wasn't just about winning, it was about restoring our dignity and beginning to heal. But the story didn't stop there. The fallout from Richard's actions began to affect his life, both at work and personally. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, I got a call from a former colleague who worked with Richard at the pharmaceutical company. "Anna, have you heard about Richard?" she asked, sounding surprised and intrigued. "No, what happened?" I replied, feeling a mix of curiosity and concern. "He's been demoted," she disclosed. "After your lawsuit, the company did their own investigation. Turns out he was using company resources for personal matters. They've reassigned him to a remote factory, basically ending his career." I sat in silence, shocked. Richard, once a rising star at his company, was now facing the consequences of his actions in a fitting manner. His career, something he valued above us, was crumbling. Jason listened quietly as I shared the news. "Good," he said simply, though his eyes showed a deeper satisfaction. "He's getting what he deserves." But the consequences continued. Richard's social circle, once close-knit, began to distance themselves. His reputation, damaged by the lawsuit and company investigation, became a liability. I heard from different sources about Richard's downfall, how he had to sell his apartment to cover the settlement and legal costs, and how his second wife, the woman he left us for, struggled with their reduced lifestyle. As I thought about these events, it became clear that Richard had brought this upon himself. His selfish and deceitful choices had led to his downfall. Reflecting on it all, I saw it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about the universe correcting a wrong. Jason and I discussed this one evening, our conversation more contemplative than vengeful. "Do you pity him?" Jason asked, his tone even. I hesitated, pondering his question. "No," I replied finally, "but I do feel a sense of closure. It's like a chapter has finally ended, allowing us to start fresh." Jason nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's time to move forward, focus on our own lives." With the legal battle settled and Richard facing the consequences of his actions, Anna and Jason looked ahead to the future, feeling the weight of the past gradually lift from their shoulders. They had endured hardships and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the next phase of their lives. As the legal issues faded into the background and Richard dealt with the fallout, a new sense of freedom settled over us. It was like we had been freed from a dark cloud that had hung over us for years. Our modest apartment, once a symbol of our struggles, began to feel more like a home. We redecorated, making it a reflection of our fresh start. The walls, once bare, now held artwork, and shelves were filled with books and cherished memories. Jason, now more relaxed and focused, was excelling in his studies. His earlier determination, fueled by anger and a quest for justice, had evolved into a genuine love for learning. "I'm thinking of applying for a research internship this summer," he shared one evening, his eyes shining with excitement. "That's fantastic, Jason," I replied, feeling proud. "You've put in so much effort for this." Our conversations had shifted from dwelling on the past to discussing the future, what we had endured and what we hoped to achieve. We talked about travel, the places we dreamed of visiting, and the experiences we wanted to have. One day, while we sat enjoying coffee in our newly decorated living room, I brought up a topic that had been on my mind. "Jason, have you considered dating? You know, meeting someone special." He chuckled, slightly embarrassed. "I've been so focused on school and everything else, but yeah, I think I'm ready to start dating," Jason said. I smiled, feeling glad to see him thinking about normal, happy parts of life after all we'd been through. It felt like a victory in itself. Meanwhile, I had found a new sense of purpose beyond my job at the call center. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping other women who had faced similar challenges. Sharing my story and offering support brought a deep sense of fulfillment I hadn't experienced before. One evening, as Jason and I sat on our balcony under the stars, a peaceful feeling surrounded us. "Mom, do you ever think about Dad anymore?" Jason asked softly. I paused, thinking about his question. "Sometimes," I admitted, but not with anger or resentment. "I think about how much we've grown since then, how he was a part of our journey but not the whole story." Jason nodded in understanding. "Yeah," he agreed, "I feel the same. He's just a chapter in our past." We sat quietly for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. The journey we'd been through wasn't one we'd chosen, but it had shaped us in ways we never expected.
I'm not scared of threats from a housewife like you who doesn't work and has no parents. You can't do anything with a pile of trash because it's just garbage. Now I understand how you feel. I'm moving out of this house. So now you'll be homeless. Good luck with that. This is a good chance for Larry to leave too. Let's team up to clean up the mess and get rid of the trash. They went to Larry's room and told him to pack up and leave. I was planning to leave on my own, but I didn't expect Larry to get kicked out too. My name is Lauren. I'm 29 years old and I'm a housewife. I recently married a man named David, who's 33 years old, 4 years older than me. At first, I thought he was mature and calm like an older man, especially because he often talked about his mother. I thought he was a good man who cared about his family. But after we got married, I saw my husband's true personality. On our wedding day, my mother-in-law was really kind to me, and I thought we would have a happy marriage. After we got married, my husband suggested we live with his mom because his dad had passed away a few years before. He said he wanted to take care of his mom. I trusted my mother-in-law, so I agreed to move in with her. But everything changed as soon as we got married. They started telling me things like, "Hurry up, Lauren, bring me tea, and clean the bathroom and toilet quickly." My mother-in-law would yell at me and give me orders like that. Maybe she wanted to scare me, or maybe it was because of her age. She'd call me loudly and make me do all sorts of chores. The biggest surprise was discovering I had a roommate no one had told me about. One morning, I was shocked to find a man I didn't know in the kitchen. I stood there wondering who he was. He noticed me and said, "I'm Larry, David's younger brother." He introduced himself. I had no idea David had a brother, let alone one who lived with us. Larry is 30 years old, the same age as me. I went to my mother-in-law and asked her to introduce me to my brother-in-law. She replied, "Oh, you mean Larry? Don't worry about him. He's like a reclusive ghost. I was taken aback. How could she dismiss her own son like that? She called him a ghost and said she was content with just David. She described Larry as a useless hermit who only went out for shopping and otherwise stayed at home. Her words shocked me. I felt let down by my mother-in-law and couldn't believe how much she had changed since our wedding. It was heartbreaking to see her treat her own son unfairly. Being an only child with no siblings, I couldn't relate to having a brother. If my own mother said such things about me or ignored me, I would be devastated. My parents have passed away, and I envy families who are alive and close-knit. I had hoped that at least parents and children could have good relationships. I asked my husband about Larry when he came home from work. I hoped maybe the brothers could get along, but my husband was distant. He said, "Just leave him be, pretend he's not there. He won't bother you." He said it like it didn't matter, as if he had forgotten to mention it. I was disappointed to hear him refer to his own brother as a ghost. My husband seemed disconnected from his family, just tied to his mother. After finishing my chores for the day, I went upstairs, feeling regretful about my marriage. That's when I ran into Larry, who was heading to the bathroom. "You're married to my brother, aren't you?" Larry said to me. "Yeah, what's wrong?" I replied. "I'm sorry, forget I said anything. But I don't say things lightly. You should consider leaving," he said. "What?" I asked, confused. "I'm sorry, but I think you should get a divorce," he said. I felt offended and confused by how my husband and mother-in-law were behaving. I married my husband because I loved him, so it was shocking that Larry would suggest divorce after just one day. "It's none of your business. I can handle it," I told him. "I'm sorry about that. I tend to be blunt." Larry apologized, bowing his head. His apology seemed sincere, but I wasn't sure. Maybe he was trying to be polite or genuinely concerned. While I was thinking about this, Larry excused himself and went to his room. My mother-in-law and husband described Larry as a strange recluse, but to me, he seemed like a decent person who deserved respect. The next morning, as I set breakfast on the table, Larry came down to get a drink. "Good morning, Larry. Why don't you join us for breakfast?" I offered. "Good morning, Lauren. Thank you for inviting me," Larry replied, casting a glance at his mother. "I'm not eating breakfast with him. Just get the breakfast done," she yelled at me. "It's okay," Larry said quickly and returned to his room. I wanted to apologize for my strong words from yesterday, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. "Hey, all you need to do is the housework. Don't do anything unnecessary, okay?" My mother-in-law gave me a stern glare. I was taken aback by her harsh tone. As the new bride, I hadn't expected to be treated like this. My husband's behavior towards me also changed drastically. "What the heck? Curry again today? You should have told me beforehand," he shouted. "I already had curry for lunch. Why didn't you call me to say you wanted something else?" I stayed quiet. He kept yelling, "You're not even apologizing. Who do you think you are? Your job is to do the housework, so make sure you understand that." I was shocked and remained silent. David didn't love me. He just wanted a housekeeper. It's awful. How could he be so cruel? I whispered to myself in disbelief. Their calm voices showed they didn't care about me. They just wanted to make themselves comfortable. They were using me. Seeing them laughing and watching TV in the living room, I quietly went upstairs. As soon as I reached my room, tears started streaming down my face. Then, a gentle hand offered me a handkerchief. "I still think you should leave," said a familiar voice. I looked up, and it was Larry. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," I managed to say between sobs. I wiped my tears quickly. "I'm sorry I used your handkerchief." "No, I gave it to you because I wanted you to use it," Larry replied kindly. I overheard what my brother and mother said. "I knew it. They're the worst," he continued. When I asked Larry what he meant by "I knew it," he confided that he had been in a similar situation before. Curious, I pressed for details. Larry explained that David had promised to marry another woman previously, but just like with me, his mother and David's mistreatment had driven her away shortly before the wedding. Hearing Larry's story brought some relief, showing me that my husband and mother-in-law had acted nice only to avoid scaring away the bride before marriage. I felt trapped and hopeless. How could I have trusted them? But I had no other options. As just a housewife, I couldn't get a part-time job, move out, or rent another place. I didn't know what to do except cry. Then Larry suggested, "If we keep talking here, it might raise suspicions. Let's meet at a coffee shop next time, if you'd like. He handed me a piece of paper with his contact information and went back to his room. Determined to leave this house, I knew my struggle for survival was just beginning. I told my mother-in-law I was going to the city office and then to the supermarket. She warned me not to leave any chores undone. So I made sure everything was perfect before leaving. She grumbled about not accepting any excuses if I was late for dinner. Pretending to agree, I headed to the coffee shop where Larry and I had arranged to meet. I told Larry that my parents had passed away, so I couldn't rely on them anymore. I had canceled the house I was renting and quit my job. I told him I needed to start all over again. It's tough to move out of the house in this situation, especially with the work that keeps me tied up with my mother-in-law and husband from early in the morning until late at night. Larry then asked me, "Lauren, can you draw?" "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, confused. "Oh, I see, so can you?" "Yes, well, I went to art school before," I said. "Really? That's great," he exclaimed. "Yes, but how?" I asked. "Just in time. Another manga artist is looking for an assistant. You can do it remotely," Larry said. "But I don't have a computer right now," I responded. "I'll lend you my computer that I'm not using right now," Larry said kindly. "Really? Thank you so much. But why do you have an extra computer? What do you do for a living?" I asked curiously. "That's nice of you to ask. You don't think I'm just a recluse, did you?" No, you speak politely and look well put together, so I don't think that at all." "Do you work from home?" I replied. "Yes, actually, I'm an engineer," Larry said. "An engineer? I had no idea. I didn't realize you were a business owner," I exclaimed. "Yes, I used to work for a company, but now I have my own business. Running things independently works better for me. We also have web designers on staff. It's a small team, so we handle everything remotely," he explained. "I see, that explains why you're always at home. But your mother and David said you're just idle at home. Haven't you told them the truth?" I asked. "I don't see any benefit in telling those two," Larry replied. "Fair enough. But if you're such a capable manager, why don't you leave that house?" I wondered. Then, for the first time, Larry shared his thoughts with me. "Let's not focus on me. I need to introduce you to the manga artist," he said. Larry immediately made a phone call, and soon a remote interview was scheduled for me. I was set to interview with a manga artist on Wednesday. My mother-in-law usually had lessons during that time, followed by outings with other participants, so I could manage the remote interview then. It seemed I made a good impression because I was hired on the spot. They agreed to send the hiring documents addressed to Larry, considering my situation. Next, we needed to find a place for me to stay. "I have a friend who works at a real estate agency. He can help you find a good deal," Larry said. "Who is this guy?" "He seems to have connections," I remarked. Our search for a new place went smoothly, and we signed a lease for a place that suited my needs. Just when things were starting to fall into place, I had an argument with my husband one day. "Hey, where's dinner?" My husband woke me up while I was sleeping in our bedroom. He seemed a bit drunk, like he had just come home from drinking. "Dinner? It's midnight. Besides, you said you didn't want to eat because you were going out for drinks," I replied. "Shut up. The king is home, and you don't even get up to greet him. And now you say you didn't make dinner. You're a useless wife." His words made me really angry. "Do you have any idea how hard I've been working with your mother for you? How can you act so superior to me?" I shot back. "That's because you're my wife. A wife should support her husband, and your job is to take care of the house. If you can't do your chores, don't argue with me. A wife who can't handle the housework is worthless," my husband said, just as I heard the door open. My mother-in-law left in an awkward way. "You're just like trash." "Larry is also trash, and this place looks like a dump," my husband sneered, with my mother-in-law agreeing. "Yes, let's get rid of this oversized trash," he added. "What did you just say?" So I asked him directly. He opened a drawer and pulled out a piece of paper. "This is what I mean. It's divorce papers. You're no longer useful to me. I'm going to find another wife who can replace you. That's why I'm divorcing you. Get out of my house, you disgrace. You think a wife is just a servant. The best wife is one who acts like a housekeeper. You shouldn't speak like that. One day, you might regret it," I replied calmly. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm not scared of any threats from a housewife like you, with no job and no parents," he laughed. My husband and mother-in-law joined in. Exactly, you're useless. You can't do anything about it because you're just trash. Well, now I understand how you truly feel. I'm leaving this house. I said that and signed the divorce papers. Then, I left. I packed my things, placing the divorce papers in my bag. My mother-in-law and husband watched with smirks on their faces. Now you're homeless. What are you going to do? It's none of our concern anymore. Good luck, homeless lady. Oh, and as for Larry, it's a good opportunity for him to leave too. Yeah, let's clean house and make this place bigger and more comfortable once he's gone. My husband and mother-in-law were already discussing their plans after kicking us out. Then they went to Larry's room and told him to pack his things and leave. I had already decided to leave, but I hadn't expected them to kick out Larry too. I felt some regret for letting my emotions get the best of me and fighting with my husband. I'm sorry, Larry. This is my fault, I said. No need to apologize, Larry replied. I've realized I can't live with him anymore. Plus, I have other interests. Maybe it's fortunate we had that argument, he smiled. It seemed Larry wasn't upset about leaving, which eased my mind a little. 5 days later, on Wednesday, while my mother-in-law was out of town, Larry and I called a moving company and left. After finishing our move, my mother-in-law called my new place. Don't worry, we're already gone, I assured her. Larry came with you, right? She asked. Yes, we moved out together. I'm relieved I won't have to see you two anymore, she said happily before hanging up. But what she didn't know was that Larry and I had been planning our revenge. With Larry's help, I managed to move out and start a new life just in time. I received a substantial settlement from my husband in the divorce. Larry had recorded what my husband and mother-in-law said during our fight, which was considered harassment and helped prove their fault in the divorce. This enabled me to claim a significant amount of money as retribution against my husband. Larry's friend, a lawyer, assisted me in securing alimony. My husband was shocked but ultimately accepted the settlement. I was deeply grateful to Larry for his support and decided not to dwell on it further. A few days later, I received numerous phone calls from my ex-mother-in-law. It felt like a nightmare come true. Realizing I had forgotten to block her number, I reluctantly answered the phone. Lauren, where are you? She demanded. There's no way I'm telling you that. We're strangers now, I replied firmly. Please don't say that, she pleaded. I'm calling because, where is Larry? She asked. Huh? Why are you asking about Larry? I responded. I've been trying to reach him, but I can't get in touch anymore, she explained. That's too bad. Maybe he doesn't want to talk to you anymore, I retorted, trying to provoke her. Then someone else grabbed the phone. Don't play games. You moved out together. You must know where he is, they insisted. You're all ridiculous. I knew exactly where Larry was, but I wasn't about to tell them. I honestly don't know. You'll have to find him on your own, I replied. Where are you anyway? You have no home, job, or place to go. If you're willing to beg, maybe I'll let you return, but only as my housekeeper, she sneered. I'm not coming back to you. I have a job and a place to live. I'm moving on, I shot back. That's a lie, she yelled. My ex-husband was shocked, not knowing I could settle everything so quickly. I didn't bother correcting him. Please do not contact me again. If you call or come near me, I'll call the police, I declared firmly, hanging up. I promptly blocked my ex-mother-in-law's number, having already blocked my ex-husband's. They seemed panicked, realizing something important. They thought my father-in-law had left them a large inheritance, but it turned out that Larry had been regularly sending money to his mother's account. My mother-in-law had always seen Larry as lazy and without a job, so she couldn't believe it when the bank stopped the monthly transfers after he was kicked out. It was only then that they realized who had been supporting them financially, but by that point, it was too late. Larry had already cut ties with his mother and brother. My ex-husband couldn't afford alimony without the money from Larry, and my ex-mother-in-law relied on those monthly transfers. Now that the money had stopped, she was facing financial trouble. They both got what they deserved, and I don't feel sorry for them at all. By the way, Larry bought a nice apartment in New York and is living comfortably there. Why was he so well off? Why did he send money to his parents all those years? It was because he made a promise to his father. Unlike his mother, Larry's father loved him deeply. Despite the mistreatment from his mother and brother, Larry stayed true to his father's wishes. His father had once told Larry, even if you don't always get along with your mother and brother, they're still family to me. Please take care of them after I'm gone. Honoring this promise, despite facing mistreatment, Larry quietly sent money to support his mother and brother. It's heartbreaking that they kicked out such a kind-hearted person like Larry without knowing the truth. I met Larry once after we moved out. He explained his commitment to his father's wishes, and I fully understood and respected his decision. He was my savior after the betrayal by my husband, and I consider him a significant person in my life. I wish him all the happiness. 2 years later, Larry proposed to me. He asked for my hand in marriage, but that's a story for another time. It's unfortunate how someone kind can change so drastically after marriage. It's like a marriage scam, isn't it? Fortunately, my brother-in-law is a dependable person, and now I'm happily married to him. Despite the challenges, I've found peace and happiness. I hope these happy days continue. Thank you for following along until the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video. He's retiring, so to celebrate, I'm taking our parents to France starting today. I'm borrowing your platinum card for the trip. We're going to enjoy ourselves using your credit card. What a trip. What are you talking about? Exactly what I said. No, I don't understand what you mean by exactly what I said. Please explain. We need to hurry. I understand. We'll leave soon. Sorry, I have to go now. I'll hear the details when I get back. Just one thing though, the credit card won't work. Huh? My jobless husband Parker took my credit card to take our parents on a trip. I've put up with a lot from Parker, but this seems like the perfect chance. I'm going to make sure Parker learns a lesson, and when he returns from the trip, he'll have some big regrets. I'm Lee, a 32-year-old employee at a major company. After graduating from a top university, I landed a great job and have been doing well. Even though I'm only 32, I make enough money to support Parker, who doesn't work, and a child, if we had one. But that's just a possibility. We've been married for 2 years and don't have kids yet, though we're thinking about it. Despite having a good job and income, I'm not happy with my newly life. The part about having a child is just an idea, but Parker not working is real. I'm not hungry for dinner because I had snacks. That's fine, but what about your job search? I didn't go for an interview today. I just stayed home looking at job websites. Parker quit his job a year ago and has been looking for work since then. Actually, he's been doing part-time jobs but doesn't keep them for long. He starts a job, quits shortly after, relaxes for a while, then looks for another part-time job. You're looking at part-time jobs again, aren't you? I'm looking at both full-time and part-time. Why don't you stop looking for part-time jobs and focus on finding a full-time position? I know, but there is a right time for everything. I wish Parker would find a steady job, but there's a reason he can't be pushed too hard. He quit his last job because of a conflict over work policies with his boss. That boss was notoriously difficult. Parker stood up to him as the office representative with his colleagues' support, but when the conflict escalated, his colleagues sided with the boss, not Parker. As a result, Parker lost his boss's approval, felt betrayed by his colleagues, and found it hard to stay, so he left the company. Parker, dinner's ready. Can you bring it here? After quitting his job, Parker became withdrawn, staying in his room. After about 2 weeks, he began to come out and help with household chores. I'll do the dishes. Really? Thanks. Then it's all yours. Yeah, I've got plenty of time. Parker joked, but his smile didn't seem genuine. Yet, another 2 weeks later, he started looking for a new job. I have an interview today. Is it your top choice? Yeah, I'm going to nail this one and make a fresh start. I'm rooting for you. Do your best. A month after quitting his job, Parker started looking for work more seriously. But even after another month, he couldn't find a job. Why do they keep rejecting me? It's all because of my last company. Don't lose heart. You'll find something good. Of course, I'm frustrated. I didn't do anything wrong. Parker may not be completely blameless, but what happened at his previous job wasn't entirely his fault either. However, quitting due to interpersonal issues doesn't impress potential employers. It feels like nothing I do is right anymore. That's not true. You have an interview tomorrow. Let's update your resume. It's pointless. I'm not going to that interview. Repeated rejections took a toll on Parker, and eventually he became defiant. One day, I returned home to find torn-up resumes scattered on the living room floor, knowing his interview hadn't gone well. Carefully choosing my words, I said, "Can you throw that trash in the bin? I'm done." Done with what? Job hunting. We can manage on Layla's income, right? I don't need to work. It was true, we could get by on my salary alone. Some people choose not to work and excel as full-time homemakers, but that wasn't Parker's situation. He seemed to be avoiding reality. Understanding his reluctance after his rough experience at his last job and the fruitless job search, I decided to be patient with him for a while. Parker, you still haven't found a job. What's your plan? I've worked hard in the past. This is just a long break. I'm not just sitting around, I'm preparing for the future. That's good to hear. Living near my in-laws, Parker's mom, my Layla, and dad, Nicholas, started visiting us more after he quit his job. They were probably worried about him. When they heard Parker was preparing for his next job, they seemed relieved, but that was far from the truth. The beer's running out today. Can you grab some on your way home? It's running out again? You drink too much? Try to cut back a bit. Fine, I won't ask again. I'll get it myself. Parker wasn't studying or job hunting. He spent his days watching TV and drinking beer. He probably didn't want others to know he was unemployed. I decided not to tell my in-laws the truth to spare Parker's feelings, even though he hadn't looked for a job in over 3 months. Finally, I decided to bring it up. Parker, maybe it's time to start job hunting again. You seem more settled now. What? It's only been 6 months since my last job. You want me to work again after what happened? I just think the break has been quite long. Stop nagging. You can't understand my feelings when your job is going well. I have my own struggles, you know. Everyone faces work problems and relationship issues. We can work through this together. I understand. I'll start looking for a job, okay? Parker walked out during our conversation. My words seemed to have hurt him, but his agreement to job hunt felt like progress. I planned to apologize when he felt better. I got a job because you pushed me. That's great. Where? At a nearby supermarket. So you'll need to learn and work hard, right? It's just part-time. No need to work too hard. Part-time or not, any job is important. Do you have a problem with that? I wanted to say more to Parker, but I decided to see how even a small step like this could help him recover. I chose to wait and observe. I'm home. Parker, you're back. How's the job at the pub? I quit the supermarket part-time. Why? It hasn't been that long. A college student there was being bossy, always telling me to put the vegetable boxes at the bottom in storage. It felt like harassment. That student was probably just showing Parker how to do the job. In any workplace, even a college student might be more experienced. Parker kept finding and quitting jobs, unable to stick with any. So Parker hasn't been able to keep a job for long, and it's already been a year. Parker, what job are you doing now? I'm working part-time at a pub. I've never worked in food and beverage before, but it's interesting, and I think I finally found my calling. Really? That's great, but isn't the income from a part-time job in a restaurant kind of low? That's fine. I'm currently apprenticing, aiming to go independent. So, you plan to own your own place someday? Exactly. The income's small now, but I'm working hard towards my goal. Then take this. Treat yourself to something nice for once. Parker still puts on a good show in front of his parents, but as always, it's all lies. He quit the pub job 3 days after this conversation, deceiving everyone and even taking allowance from his parents. This time, I couldn't help but feel disappointed in my husband, so I decided to be firmer than before. Hey, Parker. Later, please. I'm at a good part in the movie. You can pause it. I grabbed the remote control from the table, paused the movie, and started a conversation. It's frustrating when you pause at the best part. What is it? Parker, you're 35 now, right? You know that's prime working age. Don't you think about the future? Spending all day at home, drinking, and just watching TV. The future? There are plenty of 35-year-olds not working. Many people enjoy life without a job. True, work isn't everything, but those people have something else they're dedicated to. Do you have something like that? Yeah. I know you're upset about me not working. I'll look for another part-time job. Parker seems set on only working part-time. Considering his reasons for leaving his job and his struggles with job hunting, I've been careful not to upset him. But it's time for Parker to get back on track. I need to be firmer. One day at work, I received a text from Parker. Dad's retiring, so we're going to France to celebrate starting today. I'm borrowing your platinum card. We're going to enjoy ourselves on your credit card. I panicked and called him immediately. What do you mean, a trip? Just what I said. I don't understand. Just what I said. Please explain. There are so many things wrong here. It's okay to celebrate Nicholas's retirement, but Parker should have talked to me before using my money and borrowing my credit card. More like taking without asking. And why am I paying for a trip to France that I'm not even going on? Parker probably told his parents he paid for it from his savings, my credit card. Just thinking about it makes me so angry, but one thing Parker said stands out. You mentioned borrowing a credit card. Do you mean the one from our house? Yeah, why? I do have a platinum card. Some people think you need a high income for it, but that's not true. Credit history, stable income, and other factors matter, and you can get one in your 30s. It has a high annual fee, but I use it for the benefits and points. However, that credit card is in my wallet. So you took the credit card from home? Yeah, so I'm counting on you for the payment. Parker, excited about his trip to France, spoke to me in a challenging tone. I've been patient with Parker for a long time, but now it seems like the right moment to take action. Parker thinks he's smart for taking my credit card and acting cheerful about it, but he's about to realize otherwise. What are you waiting for? We need to leave. Got it. Sorry, I have to go now. I'll hear the details when I get back. Just one more thing. That credit card you took won't work. What? That can't be right. It's under Lila's name, and it expires this month. It's close, but it shouldn't be an issue. You're lying, right, Lila? You're lying to stop me from using the card, aren't you? That's such an obvious lie. Yes, it does expire this month. That's why I've already received a new credit card. What does that mean? So I have 2 credit cards to use now. Sometimes, when a new card is activated, the old one stops working. I've already started using the new card, so the one you took won't work. What? Are you kidding me? You think I'm lying. If you don't believe me, I can send you the URL to the credit card website, or you can just try using the card. It would be funny to see you try to pay with a card that doesn't work. This credit card really won't work. Hey, hurry up. I hear his parents calling him in the background, but Parker, realizing the credit card won't work, seems too flustered to respond to them. What should I do? I told them I pay for everything except the round-trip travel. Oh, they covered the flight? Yes, Dad felt bad about covering all the trip costs. What should I do? I'm about to take a cab, and I don't even have money for that. That's not my problem. You said you would pay for everything except the flight. Using my credit card in the first place was wrong. You should pay with your own money. How can I? I don't have any money right now, Parker. You haven't been taking work seriously. It's your fault for trying to impress, taking your parents on a trip without any money. I'm at work, so I have to hang up now. I just wanted to tell you about the credit card. Wait. I hung up and returned to work. Parker, unable to pay for even the cab, would have to come clean with his parents. That evening, after I finished work, I received a call from my Leila. I heard from Parker. He tried to use your credit card and lied about working. I'm sorry for the trouble. No, don't apologize, my Leila. I'm sorry for the inconvenience with the credit card. Are you okay with the money? We'll cover the cost of this trip when we return. I'll make sure Parker apologizes and starts looking for a job immediately. I'm sorry, my Leila, but I'm considering divorcing Parker. Divorce? Because of this? It's part of it, but Parker has been taking money from me for a while. What? I stopped giving Parker money to limit his drinking. He got a part-time job and started buying his own alcohol. But his part-time salary wouldn't cover daily drinking. Parker was taking money from my wallet to buy alcohol. He repeatedly took amounts ranging from $4 to $40. Over a year, the total became significant. I hadn't been tough on Parker, hoping he would change, but when he took my credit card for his trip, it wasn't just about $42 anymore. This increase in what he took made me believe he had no intention of changing. I understand. Should I inform Parker about the divorce? Could you just tell him I want a divorce? We'll discuss the rest when he gets home. About an hour later, the next morning after my conversation with my Leila, Parker called. He must have learned about the divorce from my Leila, though I had asked her to wait until he returned to discuss it. Feeling drained, I chose not to answer his call. When I returned home from work that evening, I found Parker already there. He had cut his trip short. I'll start working seriously now. Please don't leave me, he pleaded as soon as I entered the living room. Seeing Parker, he'd immediately apologized. His remorse seemed genuine, but it came too late. He had a whole year to change, yet he was asking for another chance now. Despite my repeated warnings, he had wasted every opportunity. I'm not going to give Parker another chance because he gave up on me. My decision is final. Can you leave? Please don't say that. If you won't leave, should I move out? Only if you can afford the rent here. Parker fell silent. He didn't even have the money for next month's rent, let alone any income. My words and the reality of the impending divorce seemed to sink in for him. With nothing to take, Parker appeared to leave the house, likely heading to his parents' place. I briefly considered asking if he had money for transportation, but Parker isn't a child. He should handle his own affairs. Sadly, I watched him go. After leaving our house, Parker went to his parents' home. Later, I received a call from my Layla. They allowed Parker to stay for one night but asked him to leave the next day. They were concerned he might become too dependent on them if he stayed longer. It must have been tough for them as parents to make this decision, but they felt it was necessary for Parker's sake. Cast out by his parents, Parker returned to our house, pleading with me. Please help me. I've got nowhere to go and no money. That's the result of your own actions. You need to handle this yourself. Everyone faces difficulties, and while it's okay to seek help sometimes, all you've done in the past year is neglect your responsibilities and do as you please. I didn't allow Parker into the house and turned him away from the doorstep. The divorce eventually went through. Parker was hesitant, but with his parents' support, it happened faster than expected. I'm not sure what happened to Parker afterward, but he's likely still moving from job to job and making excuses. I thought I would feel lonely without Parker, but I didn't. His attitude had been stressful, and I was always careful not to upset him. No longer needing to accommodate him, I've been living more comfortably. Unconsciously, our life together was a burden. I'm relieved I didn't let myself get dragged down with him. Now, I can live without having to cater to anyone else. It's already hard to accept that my father-in-law passed away, but what my husband Bob said next left me completely shocked. Let's get divorced. Now that I've got the inheritance, I don't need you to be my ATM anymore. For a moment, I couldn't believe what Bob was saying. What do you mean? I asked. Bob grinned and smugly explained, I have about $1 million from my dad's inheritance, so I don't need you anymore. Then Bob started complaining about me. Do you know how embarrassed I've been? I had high hopes because my dad arranged our marriage, but I was disappointed to end up with someone as plain as you. Well, why did you marry me then? You could have just said no, I replied. It's obvious, isn't it? For the money. Who else would marry someone like you? I couldn't stay silent after hearing that. Fine, here's the divorce papers. I decided to agree to the divorce without telling Bob something important. I hope he regrets this deeply later. My name is Catherine Smith, and I'm 42 years old. I run a fashion company. I married Bob, who is 2 years younger than me, 2 years ago. Our marriage was arranged. Bob is the son of Mr. Smith, the CDO of a company I've worked with for many years. Being an only child, it seemed Mr. Smith initially intended for Bob to succeed him, but Bob showed no interest and wasn't particularly good at his job. So Bob quickly dropped out of the running for successor and just worked as a regular employee. What attracted me to Bob? His laid-back nature. Since childhood, people often told me I was too serious and lacked spontaneity. I was often praised for being studious, but some people found me too stiff. Some of my ex-boyfriends even told me, "You're not fun, it's like I'm dating a boss." It was heartbreaking, but I always felt maybe I was too serious. Being labeled as inflexible was a common occurrence. I struggled with handling things casually and often got too engrossed. To me, Bob seemed like he was from a completely different world. "Oh, the place is closed today," Bob said during our first date. He had recommended a restaurant, but it was closed when we got there. Now, I would have been flustered by such an unexpected situation, but not Bob. "Let's just go to that diner over there," he said, effortlessly changing plans. For someone as rigid as me, his response was a revelation. I thought by being with him, I could also become adaptable. That's why I decided to marry him. Many people were against our marriage. Some even suggested I could find someone better. Even Mr. Smith, my father-in-law, wasn't very enthusiastic. "Are you sure you want to take on my son? It feels like I'm burdening you with him," he asked. Back then, I felt no one really understood Bob's worth. But maybe they were right. Soon after we got married, Bob quit his job without consulting anyone. He just stopped going to work. When both I and Mr. Smith asked him why, Bob casually said, "Why do I need to work if you are making money for both of us?" My father-in-law and I were so taken aback that we didn't know what to say. Why would he rely solely on me for income? "Oh, the place is closed today," Bob said during our first date. He had recommended a restaurant, but it was closed when we got there. Now, I would have been flustered by such an unexpected situation, but not Bob. "Let's just go to that diner over there," he said, effortlessly changing plans. For someone as rigid as me, his response was a revelation. I thought by being with him, I could also become adaptable. That's why I decided to marry him. Many people were against our marriage. Some even suggested I could find someone better. Even Mr. Smith, my father-in-law, wasn't very enthusiastic. "Are you sure you want to take on my son? It feels like I'm burdening you with him," he asked. Back then, I felt no one really understood Bob's worth. But maybe they were right. Soon after we got married, Bob quit his job without consulting anyone. He just stopped going to work. When both I and Mr. Smith asked him why, Bob casually said, "Why do I need to work if you are making money for both of us?" My father-in-law and I were so taken aback that we didn't know what to say. Why would he rely solely on me for income? I tried to convince Bob many times with the help of my father-in-law, but Bob's way of thinking never changed. "Even if I work, I can't earn as much as Catherine does," he'd say. Right after we got married, Bob boldly declared he'd be a freeloader, and I was tempted to divorce him then and there. If he was a young man in his 20s, maybe I would have found it cute, but this attitude was coming from a man nearing 40. Eventually, we reluctantly agreed that he'd take care of the household chores. Bob's parents had divorced a few years earlier. Apparently, before the divorce, Bob's mother wasn't very good at housework. She couldn't do anything, so I never learned from her, Bob said. It seemed like Bob was making excuses, blaming his mother for his lack of domestic skills. True to his word, initially, Bob was clueless about housework. But with consistent praise and guidance, he managed to handle basic tasks. However, that doesn't mean he became exceptionally good at it. Still, he seemed quite pleased with himself. "Thanks to me taking care of the house, Catherine can work. You should be grateful," Bob would say confidently, which often bothered me. But I didn't think it was worth arguing over. "Yes, Bob, I really appreciate your help," I'd reply, forcing a smile. There were moments when I felt annoyed, but overall, I think we managed to get along quite well. About a year into our marriage, something significant happened. My father-in-law adopted a child, a 9-year-old boy named Jack. Jack seemed like an ordinary boy, but my father-in-law isn't someone who makes decisions without reason. So why did he suddenly adopt Jack? One day, when we were alone, I asked him. He replied, "Promise you won't tell anyone," and then explained. It turns out Jack was the child of an employee my father-in-law was fond of. They had a close relationship, but tragically, Jack's parents died in an accident. They had eloped, and Jack didn't have any close relatives to rely on. Otherwise, he would have ended up in foster care. While my father-in-law wasn't sure if Jack would be happy with us, he decided to adopt him, hoping it would be for the best. "I see, that's very kind of you. Although Bob and I didn't have children, we had quite a bit of freedom. Please rely on me if you need anything," I said. My father-in-law smiled warmly upon hearing this. Thankfully, afterward, he did rely on me from time to time, just as I had offered. On nights when he couldn't make it back from work or had pressing commitments, I took care of Jack. At first, James was a bit hesitant, but he quickly warmed up to me. He's either very friendly or trying hard to fit in. Thinking about it made me feel somewhat emotional. Bob, on the other hand, wasn't happy about the situation. It seemed he wasn't welcoming toward Jack. I could understand his mixed feelings, knowing his father took in a stranger, but when I tried talking to Bob, it turned out he had a completely different concern. Adopting him? What's he thinking? This is going to cut into my inheritance. I was hoping to get everything, he said. I couldn't believe my ears. Bob wasn't conflicted about Jack, he was worried about the inheritance. "I'm going to talk to Dad about this. I'm not cool with it." One day, Bob said this and went to confront his father. When he returned after a while, to my surprise, he was in a strangely good mood. I cautiously asked a smiling Bob, "How did it go?" He replied, "Oh, it's all good. My share isn't changing." "Huh? What do you mean?" I asked. I always thought that even if someone is adopted, they still get the same stuff from family when someone dies. What's happening? Noticing I didn't understand, Bob explained proudly, Dad's making Jack give up his right to get stuff when he's gone. It's because I'm his real son. I was surprised. Could the father-in-law who talked about Jack so nicely really be planning to give him nothing? Something seemed wrong. I wasn't sure, but Bob seemed happy about it, saying, I'm glad. Well, if my father-in-law says so, there must be a reason. Anyway, he's still young. We won't deal with his stuff for a long time. Maybe I'd divorce Bob before then, who knows? I was thinking about this casually, but things changed quickly. A year later, my father-in-law had an accident and didn't come back. I didn't expect to lose him so soon. I knew him longer than I knew Bob. He was a good man in his job and at home. Hearing the news was sad. I couldn't stop crying, feeling a deep sense of loss. My eyes were swollen, and my head hurt, but I made myself get ready for the funeral. Bob was supposed to be the one mourning the most, but he seemed distant, like he wasn't really feeling it. His dad had died suddenly. Maybe he was so shocked he couldn't believe it was happening. So, I took charge to organize everything for my father-in-law's farewell since Bob seemed distant. During the funeral, I held back my tears as best I could, but the hardest part was seeing Jack cry. Bob, on the other hand, didn't shed a tear. I found it strange. Instead of being sad, he seemed fidgety or even happy. Later, I figured out why. Bob, something seems off with you. Aren't you sad about your dad? I wanted to express my worry about his lack of tears, but his response surprised me. Oh, I'm definitely sad, but I'm also kind of excited. Oops, I guess I let that slip, huh? He chuckled. Come on, Catherine, Dad was the CEO, right? He must have left a lot of money. How much do you think he left behind? I thought Bob was just lost in thought, but from before the funeral until now, he hadn't shown any grief for his father. He was smiling, thinking about the money he'd inherit. What's gotten into you? I exclaimed. Well, think about it. We're divorced, and my mom isn't getting any of it. I'm his only real child. Jack, being adopted, won't get any inheritance, so it's all mine. You think I can't be happy about that? Bob had a smirk like he was about to burst into laughter any second. Seeing him like that made me want to slap him. That's how happy he looked. He was genuinely delighted deep down that my father-in-law had passed away. I can't believe it. Say whatever you want, I said, feeling like leaving right away. But before that, I had to talk to Bob about Jack. Since my father-in-law was gone, I'd asked Bob to let Jack stay with us for a while. If not, Jack might end up in foster care. I wanted to raise him myself. Jack, you're okay with taking him in? Bob surprisingly agreed. He smiled. Sure, Catherine. What you do has nothing to do with me anymore. Then he handed me a piece of paper. It was green, a divorce paper. What's this? I asked, confused. Let's get a divorce. Now that I've got the inheritance, I don't need my personal ATM anymore, Bob said coldly. For a moment, I couldn't grasp what Bob meant. Did he just call me an ATM and say I'm not needed anymore? What do you mean? I asked. Bob smirked proudly and told me I got around $1 million from my dad's inheritance, so I don't need you anymore. With this much, I don't have to work, I don't have to please you, and I don't have to bother with chores. Isn't it great? Bob exaggerated his excitement with big gestures. I was deeply shocked by Bob's behavior. The inheritance was money that came after my father-in-law's death, but Bob acted like he hit the jackpot. He didn't seem to mourn or remember my father-in-law at all. He was genuinely happy. But money can change people. It's common for folks to act differently after coming into a lot of money. Maybe Bob's just getting carried away by the huge sum. Calm down, Bob. Let's talk about this, I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. Bob shrugged off my hand and yelled at me angrily. Shut up, you boring woman. I only married you because my dad introduced us and you were a CEO. But I always felt suffocated with you. It's been hard for me. Bob went on, listing his complaints against me. I was so disappointed when I expected someone better from the arranged date my dad set up, but then ended up with someone plain like you, he continued. If that's how you felt, you could have just said no to the marriage. I never forced you or begged you to marry me. I shot back. I couldn't accept being painted as the villain. So why did you marry me then? If you didn't want to, you could have declined. It's obvious, for the money. Who else would marry someone like you? Bob mocked, laughing at me. Basically, he married me for my wealth, he admitted. It's been a while, so I guess it's safe to say. Bob started, revealing a shocking fact. I had a significant debt. My dad said if I changed my ways and devoted myself to you, he would pay it off. So of course, I would marry you. It meant he never loved me. He just married me for the money. Well, it wasn't fun, but thanks to you, I was saved. Thanks a lot. Seeing Bob laughing so cruelly, I made up my mind. I didn't know this man anymore. I decided not to give him the advice I had planned and started filling out the divorce papers without hesitation. Bob, who had been pushing for the divorce, seemed a bit surprised to see this. Hey, are you thinking of getting a divorce now? Fine, here's the divorce papers, I said after writing them, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Now we were total strangers. Yeah, whatever happens now doesn't concern the other. You can live with that kid, Jack, and I can hang out with younger women. We're free. Bob was ecstatic. From what I could see, he hadn't cheated during our marriage, which surprised me. I never suspected it, but that was interesting. Bob, if you were this happy about it, you should have divorced sooner. I had my reasons. I wanted the money. Bob carelessly stuffed the divorce papers into his bag and left the house in a hurry. I didn't feel right staying in the house where I'd lived with Bob. I thought about starting fresh somewhere new with Jack. It seemed like a good time to sell the house and move. I wanted to live close to my parents' place. I think it would help both Jack and me. Jack would have to change schools, but he said that's okay. It's a bit sad, but now we can look for a new place without any reservations. Finding a new place was a bit tricky, but after thinking it over, I made a decision. What mattered most were the short distance to my parents' place and the great location. It's expensive, but considering Jack, I believe it's the best option out there. Jack came along to see the property, and his eyes sparkled at the sight of the luxurious house. It's spacious and beautifully decorated, with lots of storage space, which was important to me. Surprisingly, it even has a pool. I didn't really need one, but seeing Jack so excited made it worth it. Wow, this is amazing, Jack exclaimed. It didn't really matter where I lived, but seeing him happy was what counted the most. And so, we moved in. It took some time for both Jack and me to get used to it, but eventually, our new house became a comforting place for us. Around that time, I got a call from Bob. He sounded desperate and said he wanted to meet and apologize immediately. I had a feeling why he suddenly wanted to talk. I could have ignored him, but since he was so insistent, I decided to meet him. I left Jack with my mother and headed to the diner we agreed upon. Bob was already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking pale and about to cry. "Catherine," he called out as I approached. I gave Bob a cold look as he stood up. "What do you want, Bob? We're supposed to be strangers now." "Don't say that. The truth is, my dad had debts." "Damn, I never thought he'd." "Wait, didn't you get $1 million from your inheritance? Just use that to pay off your debts," I said, cutting him off. "No, the debts are more than what I inherited," Bob explained. He had more debt than the money he got. Bob inherited both money and debts from someone. I didn't know I'd have to pay off the debts too. Bob looked defeated. "Catherine, you must have some savings. We used to be married. Please help me," he begged with a flattering smile. But did Bob forget what he said before? "After all the times you made me feel small, even calling me an ATM, why would I want to help you now?" It was bold of him to ask for help. He said he wanted to say sorry over the phone, but he hadn't yet. "You really regretted marrying me, huh? After everything you said, now you want help?" "Well, back then, I never thought I'd be in this situation," Bob tried to explain. His sudden need for help surprised me. Maybe he thought he wouldn't need my money, but now he's asking for it. "Sorry, I can't help you. I don't have the money." "What do you mean? I heard your business is doing great," Bob argued. "That's not true. I wish he'd stop blaming me for his mistakes. I'm not lying. I just don't have money to lend. Not every bank lends to everyone, right? Why would I lend if I don't expect it back?" Bob looked guilty for a moment, remembering how harsh he'd been to me, but he didn't apologize. He was too proud. "Why are you being so cold? Don't you care about me?" "Oh, did you forget what you said when we divorced? We're strangers now, nothing to do with each other." Weren't those your words? I couldn't understand how he could act like he was the victim. How can he ignore everything he said before? "I might have said that, but I didn't mean it. I never thought things would end up like this," Bob said sadly, leaning on the table. "I thought about the life insurance, but my dad's lawyer said I'm not the beneficiary." "Oh, really?" I chuckled at his words, which surprised Bob. "You don't think Catherine would be the one your dad left it to?" "No, it's not me." "Then why did you laugh?" "Just felt a bit sorry for you, that's all." If it was insurance, I wouldn't have inherited the debts. Exactly. That's why my father-in-law had Jack give up the inheritance. He left something for Jack through life insurance. Jack was the beneficiary of my father-in-law's life insurance. Is that all you wanted to talk about? If so, I'm leaving. There's nothing I can do for you, I said firmly. Wait, can't we start over? I was just upset about my dad back then, but I truly care about you, Catherine, Bob pleaded. You mean you only see me as a dollar sign, right? I know, Bob tried to deny it, but I wasn't fooled again. After all, I don't have a single dime to give to someone like you. Well, someone important is waiting for me at home. With that, I left the diner. I could hear Bob crying out, but it didn't affect me. I needed to hurry home. Jack might be hungry, or maybe he got something from his grandma. I quickly headed to the subway station. As for Bob, I heard he's working multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts. With no work experience, qualifications, or motivation, he couldn't get a full-time job anywhere. I once saw him working at a convenience store while I was on my way to a client. He looked much older and thinner, quite shocking. Bob, who had been relying on others, was now facing the consequences. There's no sympathy for him. On the other hand, I'm living peacefully with Jack. We even argue sometimes now. It's saddening when Jack ignores me after a fight, but I try to see it as a sign that he's opening up to me. I plan to support him until he can stand on his own 2 feet. That's probably what my father-in-law wished for, and it's my goal in life now.